Eleanor's herbal tea was still steaming on the kitchen table when she vanished from the mountain town of McCall, Idaho, population 3,112. Early December arrived with a biting cold wind and a 12-inch layer of snow blanketing the Payette National Forest. At 8:47 p.m., Eleanor's neighbor, Mrs. Ruth Callahan, waved through the kitchen window as the 67-year-old woman crossed the narrow path separating their two modest log homes, carrying a gray wool scarf. Eleanor was returning a small tin box of cookies she had borrowed earlier that afternoon, a tin decorated with a green pine pattern that Ruth had cherished for over 3 decades. The elderly woman watched Eleanor's figure fade into the swirling snow, the deep green of her coat, the last splash of color, dissolving into the thick darkness. What happened in the following 43 minutes would haunt McCall for the next 19 years. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. McCall, Idaho, 1993, a small mountain town by Payette Lake, where the population was sparse, winters were long, and community life relied heavily on neighbors and the local trade network. Eleanor Hayes, 67 years old, lived alone in her log home on Cedar Lane. Widowed for over 8 years, her grown children had moved to Seattle. She maintained a steady routine: morning walks along the lakeside road, lunch stops at Dawson's Market grocery store, and afternoons at the community center's craft class. Eleanor was described as punctual, rarely varying her habits, and always staying in regular contact with her family. The person who knew her best in McCall was Elliot Mercer, 42, a local funeral home employee who often helped Eleanor with small tasks, drove her on bad weather days, and was regarded as a reliable close friend in town. The last time Eleanor was seen was late afternoon on October 14, 1993, when Elliot drove her away from the community center after the weekly meeting. A club member, Marlene Foster, noted the two standing and talking for a few minutes before getting into the car and heading toward Cedar Lane. After that point, Eleanor did not appear at her usual store, did not attend craft class, and did not make her regular evening call to her daughter. After 2 days with no sightings, her family in Seattle grew worried when calls went unanswered. By the end of the second day with no response from Eleanor, the Seattle family had to ask a nearby neighbor to check on her in person. What the neighbor immediately observed turned concern into clear alarm. Curtains at both front and back were drawn for several days. The mailbox was full but uncollected. The front walkway showed no signs of foot traffic, and the entire house was dark. No lights, no sounds. The doorbell was rung multiple times with no answer. The house phone rang unanswered as well. After several repeated checks throughout the day with no contact, the neighbor, at the family's request, decided to report a missing person to the Valley County Sheriff's Office. The call was received late afternoon on October 16, 1993, and quickly forwarded to the on-duty desk for risk assessment under protocols for elderly individuals living alone. Based on Eleanor's age, a recorded history of minor medical conditions in town health files, her complete absence from routine activities, no phone answers for over 48 hours, and the last confirmed sighting on October 14, the duty officer classified the case as a missing endangered adult and requested an on-site welfare check as soon as possible. The shift supervisor decided to dispatch a 2-officer patrol unit to Eleanor's home on Cedar Lane for a follow-up check, while notifying dispatch that the case required a full file under 1993 missing person standards for at-risk individuals. A temporary case number was assigned based on reporting time, jurisdiction, and subject category to ensure consistent follow-up retrieval. The patrol unit departed within 10 minutes of assignment, equipped with scene report forms, a Cedar Lane residential map, a contact list provided by the neighbor, and instructions that entry was not permitted unless an emergency situation was observed. While the patrol car was en route to Cedar Lane, the duty desk completed case coding. Eleanor Hayes's name, birth year, address, reporting party information, and last contact timeline were entered into internal forms and logged in the operations journal per Idaho's 1993 archiving standards. Dispatch also instructed the reporting party to remain available in case additional data on health, habits, or schedule was needed. By the time the patrol unit radioed confirmation of arrival in the Cedar Lane area, the file was officially classified as an active missing persons case, elevated to medium-high priority, allowing perimeter observation, scene condition documentation, and preparation for evaluation of Eleanor's residence. When the patrol car stopped at the snow-covered entrance to Cedar Lane, the two officers began a standard exterior survey of the house. They sequentially checked the front door, back door, and all ground floor windows to determine if there were any signs of forced entry, intrusion, or vandalism that could explain the homeowner's prolonged absence. Initial observations showed all access points intact, no pry marks, no broken shards, no metal scrape marks on locks, no physical indicators characteristic of unauthorized entry. This made the possibility of Eleanor being forcibly entered at home less plausible based on the on-scene officer's experience. They moved to examine window frames, glass edges, hinges, and surrounding paint for prints, cracks, or misalignment, but every detail remained pristine, reinforcing that the house had experienced no significant external force since Eleanor was last seen. After completing the structural assessment, the officers shifted attention to the surrounding environment, particularly the thin snow layer covering the walkway and front yard, where fresh footprints should have appeared if Eleanor or anyone else had entered or exited after the afternoon of October 14th. Per local weather records, the snow remained smooth, with no depressions, drag marks, or any disturbance indicating recent movement, leading the officers to note that Eleanor's absence was inconsistent with a normal or spontaneous departure in any scenario they had previously handled. They next inspected the attached garage area and found Eleanor's silver sedan still parked in its familiar spot, with no signs of recent movement or use. An important indicator since she typically drove for all daily activities within McCall, per family accounts. They opened the trunk per standard procedure, but found nothing unusual, and the interior showed no signs of recent use near the reported missing timeframe, supporting the conclusion that Eleanor did not leave by her own vehicle and that her independent mobility on the day of disappearance was highly unlikely, based on scene inference. Upon finishing the garage evaluation, the officers returned to the front to sweep additional potential movement indicators, steps, side paths, and fence-adjacent ground, all yielding the same conclusion: no entry-exit traces since the new snow layer formed over the past 2 days. The absence of any external approach signs led the officers to assess that if Eleanor left the house, it either occurred before the snowfall or did not leave direct traces, and possibilities involving health risks or non-voluntary circumstances began to be taken more seriously. They also noted no items left outside, no purse, coat, or signs she had departed unprepared in cold weather, a particularly significant detail because Eleanor consistently wore a heavy coat and gloves whenever going out in October in McCall. From the full perimeter observations, the officers reached a preliminary determination that Eleanor's disappearance was unlikely to be a deliberate departure, given no signs of preparation, no vehicle departure, no items taken, and no evidence of contact with anyone during the window. Accordingly, they documented an assessment leaning toward non-voluntary disappearance or an acute medical emergency, especially since no data supported the assumption that Eleanor left actively or with intent, and the initial file needed to be handled under the corresponding risk category. At the scene, the officers also checked items tied to outdoor habits, winter boots and her usual walking stick, all still in place in the entryway, indicating she had not prepared to leave in the evening or early morning when snow fell heaviest per standard observation. From all these perimeter findings, the patrol unit compiled a scene report with the preliminary conclusion that Eleanor's absence showed no signs of originating from ordinary movement and required escalation to higher risk evaluation for continued processing. Once the officers completed the perimeter survey and confirmed no signs of break-in or movement around the house, they contacted the neighbor again to obtain the spare key per protocol for prolonged non-response cases. After verifying the key and logging entry authorization, they unlocked the front door and entered the foyer, noting that the indoor air showed no unusual odors such as gas buildup, smoke, or chemical fumes. The first interior survey step was to divide the check path by area: living room, kitchen, hallway, bedroom, bathroom, and storage utility space. In the living room, the officers observed furniture still in normal arrangement, rugs undisturbed, coffee table, and bookshelves free of fallen or broken items, and no signs of struggle or disruption typical of in-home violence. All decorative items remained in place, with a thin layer of dust on the windowsill table, undisturbed, indicating no recent touching or movement. In the kitchen area, they checked the sink, countertops, refrigerator, and dining table. Dishes left were consistent with single-person habits, with no dropped or dragged items. There were no signs of burnt food, no forgotten pots on the stove, suggesting no sudden mishap near the time Eleanor was last seen. Moving to the hallway and bedroom, they noted the bed neatly made, blankets and pillows in order, and no signs of hurried departure, such as heavily disturbed sheets or items knocked to the floor. The closet remained closed. Clothes evenly hung, with no unusual gaps, suggesting quick grabbing or missing valuables. Eleanor's vanity was examined closely. No drawers pulled open, no jewelry boxes rifled, personal items like a watch, inexpensive jewelry, postcards, and notes all properly arranged, with no unfamiliar fingerprints or outsider traces. In the bathroom, the officers checked tiled floor, bath mat, towels, and toiletries shelf. Everything was dry, no standing water, no slip or fall marks, and no indications of a health-related incident in the bathroom, one of the common concerns for elderly solo residents. Next was the storage area and small basement access, where daily tools were kept. The basement door opened easily, stairs clean, no fresh footprints or heavy drag marks, no items overturned or broken, and the officers noted no strange odors, no unusual mold or dampness, ruling out a decomposing body or trapped animal. Throughout the survey, officers maintained continuous documentation for comparison with other missing persons cases, near zero disturbance. No signs of searching for documents or valuables, no clearly missing items. The landline phone remained in place, no signs of being lifted or dropped, cord intact, and the answering machine held unplayed messages, but nothing alerting. On the entryway side table, Eleanor's spare keys were still present, indicating she had not left near the disappearance date. These findings led the officers to an initial conclusion that if Eleanor left the house, the action lacked preparation, was not voluntary, and left no physical indicators of ordinary activity. No basic personal items, coat, purse, or walking stick were missing, which strongly contradicted the hypothesis of her voluntarily leaving in McCall's cold October weather. After completing the full interior check, the officers compiled the report and determined that the indoor space provided no direct traces to expand investigative leads. There were no signs of violence, no signs of break-in, no signs of a second person's presence, and no evidence that Eleanor prepared to leave or suffered a serious medical event inside. Thus, the interior survey conclusion recorded that the scene did not support any specific hypothesis and offered no orienting clues, requiring the case to continue relying on external search efforts and information from associated individuals to determine the cause of Eleanor's disappearance. After completing the perimeter survey and interior check of Eleanor Hayes's home, without obtaining any orienting traces, the officers moved to interviewing neighbors and nearby residents to build initial information about the victim's habits and independently confirm the last time she was observed. The first approached were Mr. and Mrs. Lofton, living directly across from Eleanor's house and accustomed to glancing over due to the short driveway separating the homes. They stated Eleanor had a very regular schedule: mornings walking by the lake, afternoons at Dawson's Market, evenings with the living room light on, and curtains usually drawn around 6. They confirmed that for the 2 days before police were called, they saw no evening lights on in her house, an unusual detail compared to her years-long pattern. When asked about the last sighting, Mrs. Lofton said it was noon on October 14th, when she was outside and saw Eleanor sitting in Elliot Mercer's car as it stopped in front for a few minutes before leaving. She did not see Eleanor return afterward and noted no activity the following day. The officers continued with the Mertz family 2 houses down, who often heard car doors or footsteps on the path due to the quiet area. The Merces reported hearing no engine starts or stops at Eleanor's house over the past 2 days, aligning with the lack of footprints or fresh tire tracks in the snow. When asked about strangers, both neighboring families stated they had noticed no unfamiliar vehicles, visitors, or unknown individuals around Cedar Lane during Eleanor's disappearance window. The officers expanded interviews to the end of the row, speaking with a man named Rob Carney, who jogged through Cedar Lane every morning before full daylight. He reported that over the past 2 days, no lights were on in Eleanor's house when he passed, and he saw no one on the porch or in the yard, whereas in previous weeks, he often saw her checking the mailbox early. From the broader witness group, police also recorded a statement from a woman named Julia Finch, who lived on the lot directly behind Eleanor's and had a clear view of the backyard. Julia said that on the evening of October 14th, she noticed the house completely dark from around 7 p.m., precisely when Eleanor usually had the living room light on, and this stood out because Eleanor's habits were extremely consistent, almost unchanging. No witness in the group reported hearing screams, commotion, panicked animals, or any signs of conflict that night or the following morning. After collecting all statements, the officers compiled a timeline from witness data. Eleanor was last seen on the afternoon of October 14th, leaving the community center with Elliot Mercer. No one independently confirmed her presence at home afterward. On the evening of October 14th, house lights did not come on as usual. From the morning of October 15th through the end of October 16th, no signs of entry-exit, no lights, no activity, and the vehicle remained in place. All statements were consistent on one point: Eleanor abruptly vanished from her normal routine, with no appearance of any strangers in the area and no unusual sounds or signs during the presumed disappearance period. These elements led the officers to include in the report a preliminary conclusion that the neighborhood provided no direct traces, but supported establishing a relatively accurate timeline for the period when Eleanor was no longer independently observed, laying the foundation to expand tracing toward close relationships and the victim's activities on her final day before disappearance. After completing interviews with neighbors and obtaining independently verifiable timeline points regarding the last time Eleanor Hayes was seen, the officers approached Elliot Mercer because he was the last person confirmed to have been with her on the afternoon of October 14th. In the initial interview, Elliot provided a relatively clear timeline. He said he picked Eleanor up at the community center around 4:30 p.m., drove her home via the usual route along Pine Street, then turning onto Cedar Lane, and arrived in front of her house around 4:50. Elliot stated that he waited for Eleanor to get out, carried her craft bag into the foyer, exchanged a few brief words about gardening plans she wanted to carry out the following week, then left the house around 5 o'clock. When asked about his activities after leaving Eleanor's house, Elliot said he returned to the funeral home, where he worked to finish some remaining tasks, mainly preparing documents for a memorial service scheduled for the next morning. He said he stayed there until about 7 p.m., then went back to his apartment on Birch Avenue. When the officers requested someone who could confirm his presence at the funeral home during that time, Elliot said no one else was there because he was the only one on shift that day. He provided some of the documents he had prepared as proof that he was actually working at the time, but there was no specific timestamp evidence, such as time clocks or sign-in signatures confirming presence. When asked about the evening after 7 o'clock, Elliot replied that he was home alone, ate dinner, and watched television until he went to bed, with no one who could confirm or corroborate. The officers cross-checked this timeline against the information provided by neighbors. According to Mrs. Lofton, the lights in Eleanor's house did not come on that evening, which contradicted her usual habit and indirectly suggested that Eleanor very likely did not actively engage in routine activities in the period immediately after Elliot left. When asked further, Elliot said he did not return to Cedar Lane and did not contact Eleanor after dropping her off. The officers focused on verifying the timeline before 4:30 p.m., and Elliot stated that he had worked at the funeral home from early morning until noon, then took lunch at a nearby diner. He named the diner and said the staff there might remember he usually stopped in on Thursdays, but he also admitted he was not sure who could confirm the exact date of October 14th, since the events had occurred a few days earlier. From 1 p.m. to 4:15 p.m., Elliot said he worked in the preparation room at the funeral home and had no interactions with anyone because the workload was light that day. The officers noted that, although Elliot's timeline sounded plausible, there were many unconfirmed periods with no corroborating witnesses and no objective traces to support them, particularly the period after 5 p.m., when he said he was alone at the funeral home, and the period from 7 p.m. onward, when he was at his own home. They also noted that the information Elliot provided about escorting Eleanor into the house and then leaving could not be independently verified, as neighbors neither saw nor heard any activity at that time. Nevertheless, at the time of the interview, Elliot was cooperative, showed no unusual signs of stress, and his answers aligned with the personality described by those who knew him: calm, organized, and rather private. Although there were unprovable gaps in time, the officers obtained no direct evidence suggesting Elliot's involvement in Eleanor's disappearance, and there were no indications of conflict or discord between the two from witness statements. Therefore, in the report assessing level of relevance, Elliot was placed on the list as a person of interest at a preliminary level based on being the last person to see the victim, but without sufficient grounds to classify him as a suspect or someone requiring special monitoring. His timeline was fully recorded in the file for continued cross-referencing with any future facts that might emerge, while no deeper investigative actions were directed at him at that point. Immediately after completing the initial interviews and noting that no witness had seen Eleanor Hayes return home after the afternoon of October 14th, search operations were launched at the first level with the objective of sweeping the entire area within a 1-mile radius of Cedar Lane to determine the possibility that the victim had left the house on foot or encountered an incident near her residence. This radius was established based on Eleanor's daily walking habits, her health, the surrounding terrain structure, and the estimated time window between her last sighting and when neighbors reported her missing. The search team consisted of 3 patrol officers, 2 support personnel, and 1 K-9 unit specialized in locating missing persons, deployed to the area early in the morning to take advantage of stable temperature and humidity conditions to optimize the dog's scent tracking ability. The starting point was set directly in front of Eleanor's house, where the K-9 was given her coat to establish the baseline scent. From there, the team began moving in an arc pattern, spreading out along paths she was likely to have used: the trail heading west, the dirt road connecting to Borden Trail, the brush area beside the Finch property yard, and the downhill stretch leading toward the edge of town. During the sweep, the K-9 showed a mild reaction to scent on a small trail segment behind the house, but the scent trail quickly faded as the group moved deeper, about 100 meters farther, forcing the team to stop and evaluate the cause. The officers noted that the degree of scent dissipation corresponded to a scenario in which the scent carrier had contacted the area several days earlier, or had only stood at the edge of the trail without traveling farther. This prevented them from concluding whether the scent dated to the time of Eleanor's disappearance, or was an older trace from her routine daily walks. Continuing southward, where the ground still held a thin layer of snow, the search team found no footprints, drag marks, or signs of disturbance indicating anyone had passed through after the most recent snowfall. This was a particularly important detail, because if Eleanor had left the house on the evening of the 14th or the morning of the 15th, the snow should have shown movement traces. The K-9 team was then led into the wooded area, frequented by wolves and deer, but no signals indicated any fresh human scent departing from the starting point. The search force shifted toward the path leading to Payette Lake, one of the areas Eleanor often walked, but this route had heavy foot traffic, making scent differentiation difficult and yielding no reliable results. After more than 3 hours of continuous searching, no items belonging to Eleanor were found within the close radius, including scarf, walking stick, purse, documents, or any essentials an elderly person might carry if leaving for a stroll. The team also carefully checked low brush, drainage ditches, and soft soil patches where footprints might remain despite snow cover, but all efforts recorded no noteworthy discoveries. In the scene report, the responsible officer clearly stated that there were no indications Eleanor had walked out of the house in any direction within the 1-mile radius after her last sighting, significantly reducing the likelihood that the victim had met with an accident near home. The search team also emphasized that there were no signs of a stranger approaching or leading the victim out of the area, as the entire snow base around the house and vicinity showed no unusual traces. The full scope established for Level 1 search was assessed as clear, with no dropped objects or any final survival indicators that could be used to determine Eleanor's movement path. This result was entered into the file as a neutral conclusion. The lack of findings did not provide investigative direction, but reinforced the argument that if Eleanor left the house, it did not occur in a conventional manner and was not within her usual nearby movement range. The point where the scent trail ended right at the back trail but did not extend farther was noted by investigators as information to retain for future cross-referencing, but at the time of the search, there was no evidence sufficient to confirm Eleanor had ever left the residential area in that direction during her disappearance window. The Level 1 search results provided no orienting indications about Eleanor Hayes's movement path, forcing authorities to move to Level 2 search with a broader scope, focusing on the Payette National Forest and the southern, western, and eastern directions from Cedar Lane, where the terrain was complex and the ground more likely to retain traces if someone had moved before or after snowfall. The expanded scale was set based on the maximum feasible travel distance for an elderly person leaving home on foot within a few hours without a vehicle, combined with Eleanor's habits of enjoying walks on forest-edge trails and occasionally stopping to view Payette Lake. The search force included ground teams, additional supporting K-9 units, and an aerial surveillance team using an Idaho state helicopter, all divided by geographic direction to ensure full coverage in a single day. The southern group focused on sweeping lesser-used trails leading into dense dead branch forest areas with thick layers of fallen leaves. The ground team noted some small depressions, but they did not match the stride size of an elderly person, and preliminary assessment indicated they likely belonged to common local wildlife. The K-9 was deployed along the trails, but showed no significant reactions to any scent, possibly linked to the victim, and scent dispersion in the forest after several days' limited tracking potential. The western group extended the search toward the town boundary, where there were many dirt roads and some routes used by residents for hauling firewood. They noted old truck tracks, but based on tread depth and snow cover, those traces predated Eleanor's disappearance and were unrelated. Officers also swept the flat land area toward Payette Lake, sometimes used by locals for fishing or cutting wood, but found no dropped items that could belong to Eleanor, nor any signs of unusual burial or unnatural movement. The eastern group concentrated on paths leading down to the lake edge, where the helicopter began high-altitude sweeps to assist observation. The helicopter flew in expanding spirals outward from the shore, focusing on irregular snow patches and openings between trees that might indicate passage. The pilot and observer reported no objects resembling clothing, purses, fall marks, or any anomalies differing from natural terrain. The thin ice along the lake edge remained intact, with no breaks, no signs of anyone stepping down or approaching the water closely enough to leave marks. In some thinner tree sections, ground teams coordinated with the helicopter for sweeps, but results remained unchanged. An important part of Level 2 search was checking abandoned cabins in the Payette Forest, scattered and occasionally used by hikers for shelter. 3 teams were sent to 4 cabins on the county land management list. The first cabin showed no recent entry-exit, with thick dust undisturbed on tables and steps. The second had animal tracks around the door, but was completely empty inside, with no personal items, no drag marks, or suspicious disturbance. The third, deeper in the woods, had a slightly ajar door, but scene assessment determined the hinges had been damaged previously, not recently. Inside were only a few old items, such as a rusted oil stove, wooden crates, and a broken chair. No signs of human occupancy in the days near the missing person report. The final cabin, near a slope toward Payette Lake, was assessed as a potential emergency shelter site, but inspection revealed only loose boards, no personal items, and no footprints or heavy drag marks. The entire area from the cabins to the forest edge showed no evidence linked to Eleanor. When compiling results from all 3 directions, every team reported the same conclusion: no signs of Eleanor's movement throughout the expanded forest area, no personal items dropped, no fresh footprints after the snowfall, no lingering scent sufficient for canine tracking, and no traces indicating the presence of strangers or coercive actions within the Payette Forest and Payette Lake shoreline. These factors were recorded in the file as a series of observations confirming that if departure from home occurred, it was not within Eleanor's usual movement area and left no physical traces to support search directions. The results of this level, despite the expanded scope and multiple resources, still yielded no leads, maintaining the case in a state with no supporting traces and no defined next investigative path. After the two on-scene search levels produced no direct indications related to Eleanor Hayes's disappearance, the investigative team shifted to collecting and preserving indirect data that could help establish the context prior to the victim's vanishing, with financial records viewed as an important component to be secured early, even though in-depth analysis was not yet possible. Under 1993 Valley County Sheriff's Office protocols, collecting financial records in missing persons cases was not a mandatory early step, but in the case of an elderly person living alone, who left no signs of departure and whose last moment of independent activity could not be pinpointed, financial data was placed in the early collection category for later cross-referencing when needed. First, officers contacted the local bank where Eleanor held her savings and checking accounts. Per legal procedure, they presented a request to review records in copy form, along with documentation proving the high-risk missing person case. The bank provided transfer records, signed checks, cash withdrawal slips, and the full transaction history for the 3 months leading up to the reported disappearance. These documents were sealed in preservation envelopes per standard, labeled financial evidence, not yet processed, in accordance with regulations to ensure no evaluation or inference occurred before grounds for expanded investigation existed. During a quick on-site review at the bank, officers noted that Eleanor's account showed low and regular transaction activity, mainly related to basic living expenses, such as groceries, bill payments, and community class fees. However, they also made a precautionary note that there were some small transactions in the week before disappearance, though this was not yet deemed abnormal without prior month comparison data. The low account usage facilitated filtering transactions near the disappearance period, but investigators determined no conclusions could be drawn from preliminary observations, as no basis existed to indicate financial factors were directly related to Eleanor's disappearance. Next, they seized Eleanor's checkbook, found in a desk drawer at home. The book was still mostly full, with only a few stubs torn out, and showed no signs of rifling or tampering. Officers quickly checked check numbers and found the most recent ones matched bank data, with no missing or torn checks out of sequence, raising suspicion. This information was recorded for storage alongside bank transaction records and not analyzed further. Cash withdrawal slips were also collected and placed in the unprocessed evidence category. They reflected Eleanor's quite limited cash withdrawal habit, consistent with family and neighbor descriptions that she rarely used cash for major activities. From this, the investigative team compiled a log listing all collected financial documents, copies of bank transaction history, copies of transfer orders, checkbook, withdrawal slips, account confirmation papers, and household bills. Rather than analyzing immediately, they placed the entire set into the financial background section of the case file, a dedicated category for data that could later support reconstruction of the victim's daily activities. The goal of this collection was not to seek signs of crime at the present stage, but to ensure that if investigation expanded, authorities would have an intact data set of financial behavior prior to Eleanor's disappearance. At the same time, placing financial records in a temporary category without analysis also ensured no investigative bias toward a financial hypothesis when no evidence pointed to that factor in the disappearance. The team also noted no signs of large withdrawals or unusual transfers very close to the disappearance time, but this was recorded as observation only and not further interpreted. In the final summary report of the data collection phase, officers stated that preserving financial records was a precautionary measure to serve analysis if the case later required deeper evaluation. All financial evidence was resealed per 1993 evidence protocols, assigned the Eleanor Hayes missing person case number, and transferred to the sheriff's office storage room pending processing, when appropriate investigative grounds arose. Completing the financial records seizure step at this stage ensured a complete file structure while enabling subsequent review steps to proceed with consistent information. In the log, the investigative team concluded that financial records at the current time contributed no orienting data but were fully preserved to provide reference background when necessary in the Eleanor Hayes case. After completing the step of collecting financial records and placing all documents into the financial background category for storage, the investigative team moved on to reviewing all of Eleanor Hayes's personal relationships and the possibility that she may have left the town of McCall on her own planned initiative, a mandatory step in elderly missing persons files to rule out voluntary departures or premeditated travel. The review was conducted across three main groups: family members, close friends, and frequent acquaintances, and parties providing financial or personal services with whom Eleanor had contact in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. First, officers contacted Eleanor's daughter and son, both living in Seattle. Both confirmed that Eleanor had no plans to leave McCall in October and no arrangements to visit Seattle or any family members. They also stated that she had not mentioned any travel, vacation, or visits to friends elsewhere. Officers noted that Eleanor maintained a habit of calling her daughter at least 3 times per week, and her failure to make any calls, starting from the evening of October 14th onward, was highly unusual and completely inconsistent with her established communication routine. Both children emphasized that Eleanor disliked long-distance travel, especially in cold weather, and never left town without notifying family. After ruling out travel to Seattle, the investigative team expanded contact to relatives in other states, including a cousin in Boise and a distant nephew in Portland. None of them had received any indication that Eleanor intended to visit, and they confirmed she rarely undertook long trips due to minor health issues and her reliance on a fixed daily routine. Next, police reached out to Eleanor's close friends at the McCall Community Center, where she attended craft classes and a regular weekly gathering. These individuals consistently reported that Eleanor had not mentioned any changes to her routine, travel plans, time off from class, or extended absence. One group member noted that Eleanor had signed up for an upcoming craft exhibition at the end of October and was very excited about preparing her pieces, further reinforcing the assessment that she had no intention of abruptly leaving town. Officers also contacted the local church pastor, who saw Eleanor every Sunday. He stated that she regularly attended services and had given no notice of absence or travel. The investigative team recorded this as additional evidence that Eleanor's habits were quite fixed and inconsistent with a deliberate departure from McCall. Another contact group consisted of service providers for Eleanor, including staff at Dawson's Market and the pharmacist at the nearby drugstore. Neither location noted any unusual activity or signs that she was preparing for a trip, such as purchasing extra medication, placing long-term orders, or mentioning travel. From this perspective, the investigative team assessed that Eleanor had taken none of the typical preparatory actions seen in elderly individuals leaving town: no extra medication purchases, no gathering of supplies, no notification to family or friends, and no mention of plans during regular interactions. Investigators then contacted Eleanor's financial advisor at the bank to check whether she had discussed or mentioned any travel plans recently. The staff member handling her account stated that the last interaction with Eleanor was 3 weeks earlier, when she inquired about interest deposit schedules, and the conversation had nothing to do with leaving town or preparing finances for a trip. There were no requests to suspend transactions, no new authorizations, no long-term financial arrangements, all indicating she was not preparing for any major change in routine or residence. An important part of this review step was verifying the possibility that Eleanor left town via public transportation. Officers contacted the McCall bus depot and intercity transport companies. No passenger was registered under the name Eleanor Hayes during the week of her disappearance, and according to driver logs on the McCall-Boise route, no one matching her description appeared on any bus. Furthermore, depot staff noted that Eleanor had not used long-distance bus services in many years, consistent with family descriptions that she only traveled far when accompanied by relatives. When checking the possibility that Eleanor was driven out of town by a friend or acquaintance, the investigative team reviewed the list of those with close or frequent contact with her. No one reported having driven Eleanor out of McCall or hearing her mention any plans to leave town. They also affirmed that if such a thing had occurred, she would certainly have informed her daughter, which did not happen in this case. From all the collected data, the investigative team concluded that there was no evidence Eleanor left town on her own. She made no preparations, gave no notice of plans, purchased no tickets, and showed no need or motivation to leave McCall at that time. The possibility of travel, or a trip to Seattle, was fully ruled out based on the consistency of information from family, friends, and related parties. These findings were entered into the file as a step narrowing the range of hypotheses. Eleanor did not leave town voluntarily, and factors related to planned travel contributed no signs indicating she actively departed her residence. After completing the review of relationships and ruling out the possibility that Eleanor Hayes left town on her own, the investigative team proceeded to the next step, examining all available camera data and traffic activity around McCall during the days relevant to the disappearance. Even though source material from 1993 was very limited due to the small town, and most businesses using only basic or intermittent recording systems. The goal of this step was to determine whether Eleanor appeared at any roads or commercial establishments after her last confirmed sighting, while also assessing whether any unfamiliar vehicles approached or left Cedar Lane during the suspected time frame. Officers began by contacting Dawson's Market, the grocery store Eleanor visited every afternoon before heading home. In 1993, the store had a single VHS camera positioned near the checkout counter, facing the entrance. After reviewing footage from October 14th and the 2 following days, the investigative team confirmed Eleanor did not appear at the store after being dropped off by Elliot Mercer. The footage was intermittent, recording about 4 frames per second with noise in many segments, but sufficient to establish that no one matching Eleanor's description entered or exited the store. Officers also checked vehicles appearing in the frames, focusing on light-colored sedans that might relate to acquaintances or unfamiliar vehicles, but all cars entering Dawson's Market during the reviewed period belonged to regular customers or local staff, with none suspicious. Next, the investigative team moved to Pine Ridge Service Station, which had 2 fixed-position cameras covering the pump area and entrance/exit. Although image quality was poor and tapes were stretched, leading to some unviewable segments, police were still able to review a substantial number of frames from the afternoon of October 14th through the evening of October 16th. No signs of Eleanor appeared at the station, and her silver sedan was not recorded. Police also checked the station's card payment logs to rule out Eleanor fueling after Elliot left, but no transactions were listed under her name. Another key step was comparing license plates entering and exiting areas near Cedar Lane. Since there were no public cameras at intersections in 1993, the investigative team could only rely on the rare footage from the 2 stores and gas station to determine whether any unfamiliar vehicles appeared repeatedly or exhibited suspicious behavior. The team extracted the clearest license plate list from viewable tape segments, mostly pickup trucks and SUVs belonging to nearby residents. All matched local registration information, and none were tied to timeframes relevant to Eleanor's disappearance. The search for unfamiliar vehicles also included checking old traffic police records for unregistered vehicles or those with unusual behavior around town during the week of Eleanor's disappearance. Results showed no reports related to the Cedar Lane area or routes leading to it, reinforcing the assessment that if anyone approached the house around the time of Eleanor's disappearance, the action was not captured by any official observation source. Police also contacted 2 other small businesses that might have had cameras, an outdoor equipment store and an auto repair shop, but neither retained footage long enough to assist the investigation. Officers further reviewed intra-town bus route information, but the depot had no recording system and recorded no passengers matching Eleanor's description. The investigative team expanded checks along the route Elliot Mercer stated he used when driving Eleanor home and then returning to the funeral home. They reviewed key intersections along this route at various times of day, cross-referencing with possible residential cameras, but in 1993, most homes had no recording equipment, making reconstruction of the journey via camera nearly impossible. Nevertheless, the investigative team noted some additional observations: no resident reports of vehicles traveling at unusual speeds, no unfamiliar cars stopped on Cedar Lane, and no vehicles leaving the area after dusk, per accounts from witnesses who regularly watched the road in the evenings. To strengthen the assessment, officers re-reviewed the entire route from the community center to Eleanor's home that Elliot claimed to have used. Although no cameras existed, information from residents and businesses along the route indicated no one saw Eleanor or her vehicle after 5 p.m. on October 14th. They also recorded no traffic incidents along the route during her disappearance window. When compiling all data, the investigative team concluded that no visual or vehicle records proved Eleanor appeared in any public area after being seen with Elliot. At the same time, no unfamiliar vehicles or unusual traffic activity related to Cedar Lane or surrounding areas appeared during the subsequent 2 days. These findings reinforced two key elements. Eleanor was not captured on camera, moving out of the residential area, and no vehicles indicated intervention by another party at the time of her disappearance. The results of the camera and route review, though limited by 1993 technology, were entered into the file as evidence that no visual proof supported any hypothesis of movement or contact after Eleanor's last sighting. In the days immediately following the camera and route review, yielding no orienting data, the Valley County Sheriff's Office began receiving tips from the public after the missing person announcement for Eleanor Hayes was circulated in the McCall community and surrounding areas. Receiving and processing public tips was an inseparable part of missing persons investigation protocols in small towns in 1993, but it also required careful screening because most information was often inaccurate or unrelated. The first call came from a young woman who said she had seen someone who looked like Eleanor in a parking lot near Payette Lake on the afternoon of October 15th. The investigative team immediately recorded detailed description and dispatched an officer to contact the tipster directly to verify accuracy. However, when comparing clothing, height, and gait descriptions, the woman quickly admitted she could not be certain it was Eleanor, especially since the sighting occurred at considerable distance and lasted only a few seconds. When officers visited the described location, they found no traces and checked the only nearby camera at the boat rental dock, which had very poor recording, but found no matching images. This information was classified as low reliability and contributed no further investigative data. 1 day later, the sheriff's office received 2 anonymous calls. The first stated that Eleanor might have gotten into a moss green pickup truck near the Boydston Road area. The caller provided no identity and hung up quickly after a brief description. Officers swept the Boydston area at the reported time, but found no matching pickup trucks and no witnesses supporting the information. Preliminary analysis noted that moss green pickups were among the most common in McCall at the time, further lowering the tip's reliability. The second anonymous call claimed Eleanor might have been taken out of town by a strange man, but when asked for more details, the caller provided no location, time, or specific description. The recording showed a hesitant, halting voice that appeared to merely repeat circulating rumors. The investigative team classified this as unverifiable information with no investigative value. Another tip came from a local truck driver who said he had seen an elderly woman walking near State Highway 55 on the morning of October 15. Officers immediately considered this possibility because, if accurate, it could expand the search radius outward from town. However, after direct interview, the driver could not recall specific details such as coat color, height, or identifying features, only stating that the build was like Eleanor's. The investigative team checked weather conditions for the morning of October 15th and noted thick fog and low visibility, increasing the likelihood of misidentification. When they surveyed the described route, no footprints, items, or physical evidence supported the statement. This information was logged, but excluded from primary investigative hypotheses. Another case involved a call from a resident in Donnelly, a town about 12 miles from McCall, who said they had seen a woman very similar to Eleanor in a household goods store. the investigative team contacted the store to verify and confirmed that an elderly woman had indeed shopped there at the time. But upon detailed questioning, staff affirmed the person was a local resident, not Eleanor. This coincidence was recorded in the file as evidence of frequent misidentifications in elderly person searches. Another type of tip came via handwritten letters, 3 anonymous letters sent to the sheriff's office in the same week. One claimed Eleanor wanted to leave town to get away from acquaintances. The second stated Eleanor was taken by someone to settle a debt. The third contained vague references to the Payette Forest. None of the letters had sufficiently clear fingerprints for comparison, and their contents were all speculative with no supporting data. Officers placed all 3 letters in the unspecified public leads category and marked them as irrelevant. All public tips were categorized by reliability, verifiable, verifiable but non-matching, or unverifiable. Through the review process, none provided specific, consistent, or matching information with actual data collected from the scene, witnesses, and search activities. Most were guesses based on rumors, misidentifications, or superficial resemblances under poor observation conditions. The investigative team concluded that public reports generated no new investigative directions, provided no specific data to expand search scope, and added no information about Eleanor's movements or presence after October 14th. In the final summary of the false lead processing section, investigators emphasized that all reported information had been checked per protocol, but no call, anonymous letter, or public observation met criteria for inclusion in the official investigative path. This conclusion reinforced the reality that the disappearance remained without clear traces, and no new indications emerged regarding Eleanor's movement, contact, or presence throughout the period after her last sighting. Processing all public tips, yielding no useful information, forced investigators to expand the search to level 3, with a radius of up to 15 miles around Eleanor Hayes's home, a step requiring greater resources to completely rule out the possibility that the victim met with an accident or moved beyond residential areas before losing contact. This search wave mobilized the county rescue team, volunteer groups experienced in mountain missing persons missions in Idaho, and an additional K-9 unit to enhance scent sweeping over large terrain. The primary search direction this time was the northern forest area, where terrain was more complex than previous directions and featured numerous ravines, deep gullies, and little-known trails. The command team created a zoned map using 1993 topographic documents, dividing the area into multiple segments to ensure ground forces could cover everything without missing critical zones such as avalanche slopes, cliff edges, boulder fields, and narrow valleys. K-9 units were deployed in 2 groups, one to rule out previously reported trails, the other to sweep untouched areas from prior searches. Each route was remarked for coverage tracking. The rescue team surveyed high-risk accident zones, such as slippery snow-covered slopes, trails near ravine edges, and sections with loose rocks prone to causing falls. They noted many hard-to-access spots due to cold weather hardening the ground and dense route networks, but systematically checked each area per protocol. Several points were flagged as hazard zones due to complex terrain, but none showed any traces indicating a person had fallen or moved near these locations during the time frame relevant to Eleanor's disappearance. In the broader radius, search forces checked trails leading into small northern valleys, occasionally used by hunters, but found no abandoned items or signs of recent human activity. Officers also coordinated with the forestry department to identify areas likely to conceal traces, such as abandoned campsites, large rock crevices, or fallen trees that might obscure objects. These areas were thoroughly inspected, but no evidence such as clothing, scarves, purses, or other personal items possibly linked to Eleanor was recovered. Throughout the search, K-9 units recorded no strong enough scent signals to track. A few instances showed mild reactions in dense forest sections, but further checks confirmed all were residual scents from wildlife or old human forest activity, not fresh or investigative value scents. This led the search force to conclude that if Eleanor had moved northward, it left no surviving traces by the time of the organized search. Volunteer groups also assisted in checking large trash bins, spontaneous fire pits, and flat clearings previously used for temporary camping, but all were clean, with no suspicious objects and no signs of disturbance near the time of Eleanor's disappearance. The investigative team also noted that weather in the days after Eleanor was reported missing was quite cold, unsuitable for an elderly person to travel far without leaving items or signs of exhaustion, further reinforcing the conclusion that no journey by her extended beyond McCall's residential area. When compiling results, all ground teams, K9 units, and support groups reported the same: no body discovered, no personal items belonging to Eleanor, no hair samples, fabric fibers, footprints, drag marks, or any traces potentially related to the disappearance. Difficult to access areas, including 2 narrow ravines, 1 densely wooded valley, and 3 steep slopes, showed no signs of entry near October 14th. The official conclusion of the Level 3 search recorded that the entire 15-mile radius to the north, northwest, and northeast provided no supportive investigative data and opened no new hypothetical directions regarding Eleanor's path or circumstances of disappearance. These findings were entered into the case file as clear evidence that large-scale expanded searching yielded no results, and no signs outside the home and usual activity routes of Eleanor were related to the case. After completing 3 consecutive levels of search with a maximum expanded radius of 15 miles and fully mobilizing rescue forces, volunteers, K9 units, and supporting on-scene personnel, without obtaining any direct leads or physical evidence related to Eleanor Hayes's disappearance, the investigative team proceeded to compile all data gathered during the initial phase to assess the case's eligibility for criminal case status under Idaho's 1993 standards. The compiled results highlighted 4 key points: no body, no physical evidence at the scene, no signs of violence inside the home, and no traces or independent camera or witness records indicating Eleanor left the house after the afternoon of October 14. In addition, the last person to have contact with her, Elliot Mercer, despite having unverified time gaps, provided no evidence or indication of direct involvement in criminal activity, and there were no details sufficient to elevate his status to suspect per investigative standards. The reviews of finances, personal relationships, and the possibility of Eleanor leaving town also yielded no reasonable basis to conclude she departed voluntarily, yet simultaneously produced no strong evidence to infer coercion or abduction. In the summary file, Valley County Sheriff's Office commanders explicitly noted that all evidence collected over 12 continuous days of investigation was indirect in nature, lacked clear elements constituting a crime, and did not support any specific investigative direction that could be developed into a criminal file. Under Idaho's investigative regulations at the time, a missing persons case could only be elevated to criminal status with at least one of the following elements: a body or evidence of violence, signs of forced entry, direct witness testimony of dangerous behavior, evidence linked to criminal tools, or tangible proof of third-party intervention. Eleanor's case met none of these conditions, although the nature of the incident was deemed highly unusual and high risk. Therefore, investigators were compelled to conclude that the case could not continue under active investigation without new data and had to be suspended per mandatory protocol. The investigative team prepared a concluding report for the initial phase, documenting all expanded search efforts, all witness statements, all camera data, financial review routes, and the list of processed public tips. All documents were packaged into a complete file, coded per 1993 standards, and transferred to the Valley County Cold Case Storage Unit to remain open but inactive, allowing reactivation upon the emergence of new evidence or witnesses. The file was also flagged as unresolved missing adult, high risk, and archived in the category of missing persons cases lacking viable investigative data, with no additional leads, no expansion directions, and insufficient legal grounds to open a criminal case. Eleanor Hayes's disappearance was officially transferred to cold case status by the end of October 1993, closing the initial investigative phase after nearly 2 weeks of maximum resource mobilization across the entire town that yielded no answers. By 2012, nearly 2 decades after Eleanor Hayes's disappearance was classified as a cold case, and stored in Valley County Sheriff's Office archives. Without any new developments, the state of Idaho began implementing a large-scale reform program for backlog cases, including the establishment of a joint federal-local cold case team to re-examine unresolved files, particularly missing persons cases lacking physical evidence or those deemed reopenable thanks to modern forensic technology. This reform stemmed from state policy and practical needs, as many missing persons files in mountain counties, including Valley County, suffered severe limitations due to 1990s forensic technology's inability to process small or degraded samples over time. When the Idaho cold case team began reviewing the backlog list, Eleanor's file was quickly identified as a standout case due to its relatively comprehensive baseline data, including search reports, witness statements, financial records, and some items seized from the home, most of which had never undergone deep analysis because contemporary technology was inadequate. Notably, the file recorded that 1993 investigators had collected several tiny trace samples, such as soil dust from the porch, foreign fibers adhering to a coat hanging in the entryway, and soil particles on Eleanor's shoes, but could not analyze them due to equipment limitations. For the 2012 cold case team, these were precisely the types of data that could become breakthroughs, as forensic technology had advanced dramatically, enabling analysis of degraded DNA, separation of inorganic, organic microtraces, soil origin determination, and tracing of previously unusable minute evidence. Idaho forensic analysts explained that degraded DNA surviving in harsh environments and potentially fragmented over time, could now be partially reconstructed using advanced amplification techniques, and soil adhering to shoes or clothing could be matched against digitized geological maps to identify areas the victim may have traversed. While reviewing the data repository, the cold case team also discovered that Eleanor's file was one of the rare missing persons cases with systematically documented initial investigation materials that had not been lost, creating ideal conditions for comprehensive reanalysis. The cold case team leader assessed that Eleanor's case was particularly suitable for reevaluation for three reasons. First, the entire 1993 home scene had been clearly documented, allowing accurate reconstruction of the context at the time of disappearance. Second, the absence of evidence or a body had led to a dead end, meaning new technology could generate leads that previously did not exist. And third, the complete lack of movement traces made the case a prime candidate for fiber analysis and degraded scent techniques to reconstruct the victim's final contacts. In addition to examining samples, the 2012 cold case team could employ micro-scanning and multi-layer fiber analysis technology, a method capable of identifying fibers originating from vehicles, upholstery, or other clothing if they had contacted the victim. In the 1993 file, officers had noted several unusual fibers on the hem of Eleanor's coat, but could not classify them due to technological constraints. This specific detail caused the cold case team to flag the case as high potential for forensic reevaluation. Furthermore, modern 2012 soil analysis allowed matching of soil samples from Eleanor's shoes against Idaho's digitized geological data, a capability non-existent at the time of her disappearance. This opened the possibility of determining whether Eleanor had stepped outside the house during an unaccounted period, and if so, what type of terrain she had reached. Upon reviewing the full file, the cold case team noted that this disappearance exhibited no lid, no trace characteristics. A case type, especially prioritized in Idaho's reinvestigation program, because it was not biased by old hypotheses or data distortions, and even a single small forensic piece could open new directions. After a 2-week review meeting, the Idaho cold case team officially placed Eleanor Hayes's case on the Phase 1 reinvestigation list, with the primary objective of analyzing all 1,993 collected samples under modern forensic technology. This decision was recorded in the minutes with the rationale case includes unprocessed trace evidence suitable for current forensic capabilities. When the file was removed from storage, after nearly 19 years, it was assessed as one of the missing persons cases with the greatest potential for resolution, due to the combination of intact original data, and technical advances unimaginable to 1993 investigators. From that point, Eleanor Hayes's case officially exited inactive status and entered the forensic re-examination phase, beginning a new effort by Idaho to pursue answers left unresolved for nearly 2 decades. When the Idaho cold case team officially retrieved Eleanor Hayes's file from storage, Idaho State Police investigator Carla Norton was assigned to take over the entire case and begin a complete re-review, a task requiring both absolute meticulousness and the ability to spot weaknesses that the 1993 investigation could not detect. In the initial days of file contact, Carla spent all her time in the archive room, opening every report binder, reviewing every scene photo, every search report, every scattered note from Valley County Sheriff's Office officers nearly 20 years earlier. She recorded everything in her notebook: timelines, steps taken, search routes covered, interviewee lists, seized evidence, and especially the gaps the old team could not fill due to technical limitations or lack of supporting data. After 3 continuous days of review, Carla identified 3 critical deficiencies that caused the case to stall in 1993 and that could now open new investigative paths after nearly 2 decades. The first deficiency concerned trace evidence collected at Eleanor's home. In the 1993 examination report, officers noted the presence of soil samples on shoes, foreign fibers on the coat hem, and unusual soil dust accumulation near the parking area, but only collected them without further analysis due to inadequate technology at the time. Carla marked this entire sample group as priority trace evidence and viewed it as the re-investigation focus because in 2012, the Idaho lab could analyze degraded DNA, compare mineral compositions in soil, and identify fiber origins using specialized indexing systems, capabilities completely unavailable in 1993. The second deficiency lay in constructing the timeline of the most critical witness, Elliot Mercer. The 1993 file only verified Elliot's basic activities on the evening he drove Eleanor home, without expanding to check the following day's schedule, cross-referencing real-time evidence from others, examining financial transactions or communication locations, or scrutinizing extended unaccounted periods amounting to nearly half a day that Elliot could not prove. For Carla, this was not evidence of Elliot's involvement, but the clear lack of independent verification created timeline holes that affected risk assessment at the time. She noted the need to re-interview Elliot, recheck 1,993 available data sources, now digitizable or retrievable from financial archives, and cross-reference old statements with physical data for consistency. The third major deficiency involved the geographic search scope. The 1993 forces conducted 3 search levels, but primarily focused north and east, while documents noted some indications that Eleanor often walked southwest toward forest access roads, yet this area received no comprehensive search due to limited manpower and bad weather. Carla assessed this as a significant tactical oversight because topographic maps showed the area contained numerous depressions and gullies, locations where a body could be naturally concealed and undetectable by helicopter. Additionally, soil samples taken from Eleanor's shoes in 1993 had compositions consistent with clay-mixed soil in the southwest area, a detail noted but not pursued further. After reviewing the 3 main deficiencies, Carla developed a re-investigation roadmap and presented it to the Idaho cold case team. The roadmap consisted of 4 main work groups arranged by priority and logical sequence. Group 1, reanalyze all 1,993 collected trace samples, including soil, fibers, and adhering dust. Compare against 2012 digitized geological maps. Test for degraded DNA if extractable. Match fibers against commercial fiber databases and automotive interior fiber systems. Group 2, re-evaluate Elliot Mercer's timeline by re-interviewing using memory bias identification methods, retrieving 1993 financial records from archived bank data, checking preserved phone or mail records if available, and cross-referencing everything with prior statements. Group 3, reconstruct the search map using detailed topographic data, Identify 1993 unsearched areas with trace evidence relevance. Propose supplemental searches using K9 teams specialized in degraded scent tracking. Group 4. Digitize the entire case file, including statements, photos, reports, financial documents, for behavioral pattern algorithm analysis to assess whether Eleanor fit patterns of targeted assault victims, non-voluntary disappearance, natural accident, or other causes. After finalizing the assessment, Carla stated in the report that the Eleanor Hayes case had structured potential for resolution pending forensic reevaluation, a rare rating for long-dormant files. With the 3 critical deficiencies identified in a clear reinvestigation roadmap, Carla formally recommended advancing Eleanor Hayes's case to in-depth analysis phase, a pivotal transition marking the case no longer as merely an old file, but as one with genuine potential for resolution after nearly 2 decades buried by time. Once the reinvestigation roadmap was approved, investigator Carla Norton's first step was to implement full reconstruction of Elliot Mercer and Eleanor Hayes's timeline using 2012 geographic data analysis technology, a tool non-existent in 1993 but capable of recreating paths, movement times, and individual appearances based on multiple indirect data sources. Carla began by inputting all old file information into the system: the time Eleanor and Elliot were seen leaving a small diner on Railroad Avenue on the evening of October 14, 1993, the time Elliot claimed to have dropped Eleanor at home, moonset time, ambient light levels per historical meteorological data, the time temperature dropped low enough for snow to refreeze, and feasibility of each route Elliot claimed to have taken. The timeline reconstruction technology allowed Carla to simulate the actual travel speed of Elliot's pickup truck on each road segment, including unlit sections and icy segments per historical weather data Carla obtained from NOAA. When running the first simulation, Carla noted that the time Elliot claimed to have dropped Eleanor home, around 8:45 p.m., did not fully align with the average speed of the pickup he owned in 1993, especially on the route from central McCall to the residential area near Payette Lake. This time window was shorter than the minimum possible per simulation, unless Elliot had shortened some segment not recorded in the old file. Carla marked this as inconsistency A. To reinforce the data, Carla input detailed topographic maps and simulated light levels at each location by hour. Results showed that at the time Elliot claimed to have left Eleanor's house for his own, actual ambient light was far lower than 1993 estimates. This was significant because it affected the observation capability of any nearby witnesses. When Carla re-examined all old witness statements, she identified one overlooked important report from 1993. An elderly man living near the Northern Trail reported hearing a slow-moving vehicle pass his house around 9:10 p.m. on the night Eleanor disappeared, but because he could not identify the vehicle and weather was poor, the report was excluded from leads. Carla decided to recontact this witness, now over 70 years old. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours, and he confirmed that on that evening, he not only heard the vehicle, but also saw headlight reflections through the trees. Though uncertain, he believed the vehicle was roughly the size of a pickup. When Carla showed him images of Elliot's 1993 vehicle, he hesitated, then said the shape was very similar to what he had seen. This detail caught Carla's strong attention because the Northern Trail was not on any route Elliot claimed in his 1993 timeline, and the area was not a main public road at the time. The appearance of a vehicle similar to Elliot's there exactly during Eleanor's disappearance window made Elliot's timeline significantly contradictory. Carla returned to the office and input the new witness data into the reconstruction model. When the system ran the simulation, a notable result emerged. If Elliot truly left Eleanor's house at 8:45 p.m. as claimed, and if a vehicle matching his was seen on the Northern Trail at 9:10 p.m., this could only occur if Elliot had taken an unrecorded detour route. Additionally, speed simulation determined that Elliot's originally claimed route could not reach the witness location in time if he traveled as stated. But if he headed north, immediately after leaving Eleanor's house, the timing matched perfectly. Carla noted, inconsistency B, timeline deviation consistent with witness location. To check for witness memory bias, Carla used the model to compare actual light conditions at the Northern Trail at 9:10 p.m. in 1993. Results showed that although light was low, the human eye could still discern general vehicle shape and width. This bolstered the relative reliability of the new statement. Combining the two contradictions, Elliot's timing mismatch with simulation and the possible matching vehicle on the Northern Trail, Carla flagged Elliot's 1993 timeline as structurally inconsistent. She continued analyzing old traffic radar reports, though 1993 data was very limited, and noted an interesting point: a report of a slow-moving vehicle at 9:05 p.m. near the intersection to the Northern Trail, logged by patrol officers, but not followed up due to no apparent violation. When Carla cross-referenced this time with simulation data, it perfectly matched a route Elliot could have taken if his initial statement was inaccurate. At this point, the reconstructed timeline indicated Elliot may have been near the Northern Trail during Eleanor's disappearance window, directly contradicting his claim that he left her house and went straight home. Carla concluded that serious inconsistencies existed in Elliot's statements, not sufficient to charge, but sufficient to place Elliot in the person of interest category for the reinvestigation phase. While opening a new analytical direction, the Northern Trail location in 1993 may be directly related to Eleanor Hayes's disappearance. When the reconstructed timeline indicated the possibility that Elliot Mercer appeared on the Northern Trail on the very night Eleanor disappeared, investigator Carla Norton shifted to geoprofiling analysis, a 2012 technique that evaluates spatial logic based on behavior, movement habits, and location selection patterns of potentially involved subjects. Carla began by compiling all available data on Elliot's travel habits from 1990-1993, the routes he typically drove from home to downtown McCall, the areas he frequently visited to gather wood samples, the fishing spots he stopped at, and the trails he knew well due to having lived in McCall long before meeting Eleanor. Town records, combined with information from Elliot's friends, showed he was particularly familiar with the Northern Forest area, stretching along the hillside towards small ravines that drained into the Payette River Valley. Meanwhile, the 1993 traffic map indicated that the southwest area, where earlier search teams had concentrated heavily, was a region Elliot rarely visited. Carla cross-referenced this data with modern geoprofiling tools, then ran a predictive model based on three variables: Elliot's level of terrain familiarity, reasonable travel distance within the 9:10 p.m. window, and terrain suitability for someone intending to dispose of a body quickly under light snowfall and limited visibility. The first simulation results showed the high probability zone did not lie to the south or east as predicted in 1993, but instead concentrated along three branches of northern trails leading into fractured terrain, featuring narrow rock crevices, dense vegetation, and steep slopes, locations difficult for unfamiliar individuals to access, but advantageous for anyone who had traversed the area for years. Carla continued examining records of routes Elliot used when harvesting wood as a side job in the past, discovering that he had personally noted in his journal several stopping points at the edges of small ravines to collect soil samples for herbal research. These notes were not reviewed by 1993 police because they appeared unrelated to the disappearance, but to Carla, they became significant indicators. Elliot was not only familiar with the Northern Forest, but also with little-known locations, precisely the kind of places likely chosen if someone wanted to conceal a body undetected for a long time. Next, Carla ran a probability model based on geoprofiling principles of least effort and buffer zone. A terrain-familiar individual typically selects a site far enough to delay discovery of the victim, but not so distant as to increase transport risk of detection. When these principles were applied to the 1993 McCall map, the model immediately narrowed the suspect zone to a strip of terrain less than 2 square miles surrounding the northern Payette ravine system, an area that in 1993 received no search at all due to poor road conditions, ice cover, and harsh weather. Carla further checked vehicle accessibility, whether Elliot's pickup could enter the area, and at what point historical satellite maps and slope data showed that although the northern trail was narrow and winding, a small pickup could still travel about half a mile before the terrain became too rough, forcing the driver to proceed on foot. This aligned perfectly with the witness who saw vehicle headlights in the area where he lived, only about 300 meters from the trailhead. When all data were cross-referenced, the suspect zone became so clearly defined that Carla marked a red-shaded area on the map, coded Red Zone. North Ravine Cluster, a cluster of ravines, slopes, and small valleys, lying between two trails overlooked during the 1993 searches. This area featured high vegetative cover, thick leaf litter, large boulders, and deep crevices, factors that would conceal a body for an extended period without detection by wildlife or hikers. When Carla rechecked the 1993 soil samples taken from Eleanor's shoes, preliminary lab analysis showed the soil composition more consistent with clay-mixed soil from the northern region, particularly near the V-shaped valleys within the red zone. With 2012 soil analysis technology, the lab could likely pinpoint the sub-area where the soil adhered to Eleanor's shoes, something impossible in 1993. Carla assessed that the red zone was not only a new suspect area, but the one with the highest probability of holding the answer to a disappearance that had lasted nearly 2 decades. The geoprofiling model also concluded that the route from Eleanor's house to the red zone fully matched the contradictory timing in Elliot's timeline, including the witness hearing a vehicle and the patrol unit's report of a slow-moving vehicle near the trail intersection. Recognizing that the model not only generated possibilities but logically connected all new data, Carla designated the red zone as the primary target for the field reinvestigation phase and noted, "New suspect zone exhibits high behavioral fit with strong potential direct relevance to Eleanor Hayes's disappearance." Less than 2 weeks after the red zone was established as the primary suspect area, an entirely unexpected development occurred. A local hunter named Mark Ellman walked into the Valley County Sheriff's Office and turned over an old wool scarf he had found while checking traps in the northern ravine area, precisely within the zone Carla had outlined. Mark stated that he discovered it early, one late fall morning in 2012, while following a narrow trail into the ravine cluster. At a point of dense vegetation, he spotted a grayish-brown wool fragment mixed in with decayed leaves. At first, he thought it was merely cloth discarded by hikers, but upon picking it up, he noticed the fabric was thick, aged, and the wool fibers frayed in a manner inconsistent with recently dropped items. What prompted him to report it was that the discovery location lay entirely within an area that should have been searched in 1993, yet according to his memory, as someone who hunted there regularly, no rescue team or police had ever set foot exactly at that spot over the years. When the scarf was transferred to Carla, she immediately compared it against the initial file's list of items Eleanor commonly used, which noted that the victim owned a taupe gray wool scarf, confirmed by family as one she wore on evening walks. However, in 1993, during the home examination, the scarf was not found and was listed as location undetermined. At the time, lacking other supporting traces, the original investigators assumed Eleanor might have left it somewhere in town or dropped it en route. Yet its appearance in the red zone 19 years later carried entirely different significance. Carla immediately placed the scarf into modern evidence processing. First, fiber structure scanning to identify wool type, dye, weave pattern, and degradation level to estimate environmental exposure time. Preliminary results showed the wool matched hand-woven structures common in the 1970s, consistent with the type Eleanor used. The dye, though heavily faded, still matched color samples from family photos. Most crucially, tiny protein deposits remained in the fiber core, a biological trace that could allow degraded DNA extraction. To rule out coincidence, the Idaho lab tested minute surface samples from the scarf, then amplified mitochondrial DNA regions for comparison against Eleanor's DNA profile, preserved from a hairbrush in 1993. Results returned after 3 days stunned the entire cold case team. The scarf sample matched Eleanor Hayes's DNA across all analyzed markers, exceeding the confirmation threshold. Carla immediately recognized this as the first legally probative physical evidence in the case after nearly 2 decades without tangible traces, proving one thing that had remained only an assumption for years: Eleanor had been physically present in the red zone. Beyond that, the lab detected a thin layer of soil deeply embedded in the wool fibers, presumed to date from when the scarf was left behind. When this soil's mineral composition was compared against Idaho geological data, results showed a clear match with the clay-mixed soil characteristic of narrow valleys in the northern ravine cluster, the very core area of Carla's geoprofiling suspect map. This confirmed the scarf's discovery location was almost certainly where it fell or was discarded on the night Eleanor disappeared, rather than being carried there by wind or animals, as the steep terrain and dense vegetation made passive transport highly improbable. Based on fiber degradation, experts estimated the scarf had lain exposed for 15 to 20 years, a time frame perfectly consistent with 1993. Carla promptly reported the find to the cold case team and requested the first evidence map since the case began. On the map, she precisely marked the coordinates of the scarf's discovery and coded it Red Zone 1, treating it as the starting point for evaluating potential additional traces. She also considered animal movement of evidence, but scene analysis showed the scarf lay between 2 large pine trunks, shielded by a boulder and thick brush, meaning it was either deliberately placed or fell from someone in motion. Given the fraying pattern on the left edge, Carla hypothesized the scarf may have been tugged or yanked rather than simply slipping from the victim's neck. The emergence of evidence bearing Eleanor's DNA fundamentally changed the scale and direction of the investigation. No longer an undirected missing persons case, it now had a clearly established spatial anchor, the place Eleanor was demonstrably present before vanishing. For the first time in 19 years, Carla could draw a conclusion grounded in empirical evidence rather than assumption. The evidence map, previously blank, now contained point Red Zone 1, opening a clear possibility. The northern ravine area was not merely suspect, it might be the hidden site of the disappearance that had remained concealed for nearly 2 decades. Once the scarf bearing Eleanor's DNA was confirmed, Carla immediately recognized that the mandatory next step was a comprehensive re-examination of Elliot Mercer's old pickup truck, the vehicle he had kept for many years and still stored in his McCall garage, still operational, but with some parts replaced. In 1993, police had conducted only a cursory exterior check and found nothing noteworthy, but 2012 forensic technology allowed microtrace analysis at a level impossible in the 1990s. Carla coordinated with the Idaho Crime Lab to request a full interior and undercarriage examination, including floor mats, accelerator pedal, door sills, wheel wells, and every location capable of accumulating soil or microscopic material. Initially, Elliot consented to the inspection with a cooperative demeanor, stating he had nothing to hide, but Carla observed tension in the way he stood with arms crossed and constantly watched the technicians, as if wanting to ensure they discovered nothing he feared. Technicians began with specialized adhesive tape lifts to collect microparticles from the cab, then scanned the vehicle carpets with xenon lighting for foreign fibers. Next, they used a micro-vacuum with specialized filters to extract soil particles from crevices invisible to the naked eye. Under the chassis, dried soil clung in small patches to the steel frame, quite unusual for a truck used primarily on town roads. One technician noted that the soil type did not match McCall Street dirt, as its coarse grain and visible clay content were distinctly different. Carla immediately ordered each sample packaged for comparison with red zone soil. Inside the cab, technicians discovered 3 extremely small fibers lodged in the passenger seat track grooves. Under fluorescent light, they reacted like natural wool structures. Carl immediately recalled Eleanor's wool scarf found in the ravine. While visual identification alone was insufficient, the coincidence prompted her to flag these fibers as priority evidence for analysis. The examination process lasted nearly a week. The first results came from the forensic geology team. The mineral composition of soil samples from Elliot's undercarriage showed significant matching with red zone soil, specifically high montmorillonite clay content, low microcrystalline quartz, and weathering signatures characteristic of the northern ravine area, completely distinct from soil en routes Elliot claimed to have traveled on the night Eleanor disappeared. One technician emphasized that this soil type could not be mistaken because it occurred only in a narrow geological band spanning less than a mile within the ravine cluster, an area not on any main transportation route. This meant Elliot's truck had entered a region he had repeatedly denied visiting. The next results came from the fiber analysis team. The 3 fibers recovered from the passenger seat grooves matched the wool structure used in Eleanor's scarf, not a 100% match due to the fiber's small size preventing full color determination, but weave structure, twist, and protein nature, all aligned with the hand-woven wool she used. The probability of random coincidence was reported as extremely low. When Carla received the official report, she saw in the conclusion the statement, "Fibers exhibit probable direct or indirect contact with material consistent with the scarf of Eleanor Hayes." Combined with the DNA on the scarf and soil matches, this created a complete chain linking Eleanor, the red zone, and Elliot's truck. The final and most critical evidence came from micro-soil analysis in the driver's side floor mat. A small sample contained decomposed leaf litter particles identified as coming from subalpine fir, a species found only in narrow northern McCall valleys. Particularly, tiny bark fragments adhering to the mat displayed microstructural patterns matching bark from trees in the harsh climate of the ravines, precisely where the red zone was located. This proved that not only the exterior, but the interior of the truck carried traces of the area Elliot denied visiting. Carla drafted the conclusion report. Elliot's truck had entered the red zone during the time frame consistent with the night Eleanor disappeared. When Carla presented the report to the cold case team, investigators unanimously agreed that from this point forward, Elliot could no longer be regarded merely as the last person to see the victim, but must be designated primary person of interest. The presence of distinctive ravine soil in his truck, fibers consistent with the victim's scarf, and alignment with the reconstructed timeline rendered any denial by Elliot untenable. With Microtrace evidence now confirmed, Carla created a linkage map: Eleanor, scarf, red zone, micro-soil, Elliot's truck. The final link had formed, and for the first time in 19 years, investigators could assert physical evidence showing Elliot Mercer had been in the exact suspect zone on the night Eleanor Hayes disappeared. While the forensic team completed microtrace analysis on Elliot's truck, Carla shifted focus to the financial data seized in 1993, but never deeply processed due to technical limitations. The old file recorded numerous checks, transfer slips, and cash withdrawal receipts in Eleanor's name in the weeks following her disappearance, but at the time, police could not verify authenticity without advanced signature comparison tools. Now, with 2012 handwriting analysis technology and digitized character recognition software, Carla requested scanning of all original Eleanor signatures from pre-1993 documents, handwritten letters, tax forms, driver's license, hospital records, to build a standard signature model. Once the software modeled 27 handwriting characteristics of Eleanor, including slant, stroke ratio, pen pressure, turning points, and character spacing, Carla began comparing each question check. In the very first analysis pass, the system flagged anomalies. 9 checks dated after Eleanor's disappearance showed deviation exceeding acceptable thresholds, with 6 exhibiting simulated handwriting lacking her characteristic heavy initial downstroke. Several strokes indicated slower than normal writing speed, a classic sign of deliberate imitation. Additionally, these checks were all deposited at the bank branch Elliot frequently visited, not the one Eleanor typically used. Carla continued analyzing Eleanor's financial transaction records for the 3 months following her disappearance. A series of irregularities emerged. 3 large cash withdrawals Eleanor had never made before, 2 transfers to Elliot's secondary account, and notably, a payment for home repair materials, an expense unrelated to Eleanor's living habits, yet matching invoices found in Elliot's garage during the 1993 police check. When Carla requested archived bank video, they replied that in 1993, no camera system existed at transaction counters. However, internal records retained the names of serving tellers, and one still worked at the branch in 2012. Carla interviewed this employee. She recognized Eleanor's name, but stated that in 2 transactions after Eleanor was reported missing, the person signing the checks was not an elderly woman, but a man presenting verbal authorization. Notably, the teller's transaction log did not record the man's name due to looser bank rules at the time, but the physical description, medium build, brown hair, McCall accent, perfectly matched Elliot during that period. Carla expanded the signature check, requesting manual reanalysis by independent handwriting experts to avoid over-reliance on software. The independent expert report concluded that signatures on the post-disappearance check series exhibited high simulation probability, unnatural stroke flow, structural characteristics inconsistent with the victim's baseline, and at least 14 points of structural discrepancy. Most strikingly, one check showed an abnormally upward curved H in haze, a distinctive stroke characteristic of Elliot that appeared in his employment contracts and tax records. This coincidence constituted strong behavioral evidence. When the financial records were compiled into the official report, Carla had only one final step: cross-referencing transactions with Elliot's timeline. The results aligned perfectly. Every anomalous financial transaction fell on days Elliot claimed he stayed home all day or worked around town, timeframes no one could corroborate. Conversely, no evidence existed that Eleanor remained alive after her disappearance to conduct these transactions. From this, Carla drew an irrefutable conclusion. A series of fraudulent financial activities had been carried out in Eleanor's name for weeks after her disappearance, and these actions could only have been performed by someone with access to her documents, accounts, and signature, namely, Elliot Mercer. In the conclusion memorandum, Carla wrote clearly, "Post-disappearance financial transactions are fraudulent in origin. Signatures, not those of Eleanor. Asset misappropriation combined with Microtrace evidence establishes probable cause for suspect arrest." For the first time in the entire case, motive appeared clearly: financial gain. And simultaneously, Elliot Mercer was no longer merely the last person to see the victim. He became the primary official suspect with fraud established by forensic technique. When the financial evidence established a clear motive, and the Microtrace evidence showed that Elliot had entered the red zone on the night Eleanor disappeared, Carla moved to the most critical step: ground-penetrating radar (GPR) survey of the red zone. Her objective was to determine whether there were signs of an area that had been dug up and refilled, a feature commonly associated with body disposal sites. In the first week of deployment, Carla and the technical team planned based on the previous Geoprofile map, prioritizing 11 coordinate points, 5 of which were near the scarf discovery location. The red zone was rugged terrain with steep slopes and dense vegetation, making equipment transport far more difficult than in typical searches. However, the 2012 generation GPR was compact enough to be towed by an off-road vehicle, while powerful enough to penetrate more than 2 meters depending on soil conditions. The technical team began at Red Zone 1, the scarf discovery site, then gradually expanded in a fan-shaped pattern as Carla had sketched on the map. GPR operates by emitting radar waves into the ground and recording reflected signals. Areas with disturbed soil, voids, or differing material create anomalous signal patterns. At the second survey point, GPR recorded uniform ground with no structural changes. But at the fourth point, about 30 meters northeast of the scarf location, the device produced an unusually high deviation signal, characteristic pulses of soil that had been excavated and backfilled, with the top compacted layer showing slight fracturing. Carla ordered 3 repeat scans from 3 different angles to eliminate error. The results remained consistent. A soil area, approximately 1.8 quadr 0.9 meters, exhibited distinctly different density from the surrounding ground. This pattern was inconsistent with natural depressions and even less likely to result from animal activity, given the estimated depth exceeded typical digging behavior in the region. More importantly, the 3-dimensional GPR model revealed 2 soil layers, The top layer was natural clay-mixed ravine soil. The layer immediately beneath was disturbed soil with differing conductivity, suggesting it had been scooped from elsewhere and hastily replaced. When the team expanded scanning to both sides, they recorded two smaller anomalous bands resembling drag marks of a heavy object before burial. Although nothing could be confirmed until excavation, for Carla the GPR model provided the first geophysical evidence the case had ever had. Crucially, the GPR anomaly locations aligned precisely with the optimal movement corridor identified by the Geoprofiling model, the most feasible path from where the vehicle could have stopped to the area with the thickest vegetative cover. To reinforce the findings, Carla requested an independent GPR expert review of the data. The expert report confirmed that the soil structure exhibited very high disturbance consistency, radar signal noise, void profiles, loss of natural layering, and reduced wave return all matched characteristics of long-existing burial pits. Carla recognized that this was not merely a technical discovery, but the final piece needed to establish legal probable cause for an arrest warrant for Elliot Mercer. With microtrace evidence from Elliot's truck proving his entry into the red zone, the scarf bearing Eleanor's DNA, found in the same area, forged signatures, and fraudulent transactions after the victim's disappearance, and now signs of soil disturbance precisely within Elliot's accessible range on the night of the incident. The cumulative evidence surpassed Idaho's probable cause threshold. In the report submitted to the Valley County prosecutor, Carla presented the integrated dataset, one contradictory timeline proving Elliot's false statements, two rare soil traces in Elliot's truck perfectly matching Arged Zone soil, three wool fibers in the truck consistent with Eleanor's scarf, four physical evidence of the scarf, confirming victim DNA. 5. Geoprofile, narrowing the suspect zone exactly where GPR detected disturbed soil. 6. Repeated financial fraud over weeks following Eleanor's disappearance. The prosecutor assessed this as a logical, independent but mutually reinforcing chain of evidence, fully meeting warrant standards. Carla drafted the Red Zone Survey Conclusion Memorandum. GPR identifies ground anomaly with characteristics of an old burial pit located within the suspect's feasible movement range and coinciding with the area containing victim DNA evidence. Combined with financial and microtrace data, criminal indicators are strongly corroborated. The ground-penetrating radar survey not only provided suspect coordinates, but completed the pivotal legal foundation, the final step enabling Carla and the cold case team to seek an arrest warrant for Elliot Mercer after 19 years since Eleanor Hayes vanished silently amid the Idaho mountains. When the comprehensive report compiling GPR results, microtrace analysis, financial evidence, and timeline cross-referencing was presented by Carla to the Valley County Prosecutor's Office, the arrest warrant for Elliot Mercer was approved within hours based on two immediately applicable charges under 2012 Idaho statutes: financial fraud involving unauthorized use of Eleanor Hayes's account and signature, and false statements to law enforcement during a missing persons investigation. This was a calculated tactic chosen by Carla rather than charging offenses directly related to the disappearance or harm to the victim without excavating the suspect area. Authorities arrested Elliot on sure win charges to prevent further concealment of information and eliminate flight risk. At 6:20 a.m. the following morning, the Valley County Sheriff's Office and Idaho State Police arrest team approached Elliot's residence per standard tactical plan. Because Elliot had no prior violent record, the arrest was executed at medium risk level while fully complying with safety protocols. 2 officers approached the front door, 1 covered the rear, while Carla remained outside the perimeter in support, observing the suspect's initial reaction. When Elliot opened the door, he appeared confused by the simultaneous presence of multiple officers, but attempted to maintain calm. Carla noted his hands gripping the doorframe, a clear sign of anxiety. An officer read the warrant, specifying legal grounds, including 3 unauthorized financial transactions, 4 forged signature checks, and 2 instances of false statements regarding the timeline on the night of October 14, 1993. Elliot attempted to counter that he never defrauded anyone, claiming he only helped Eleanor pay some bills, but once the warrant was fully read, his explanations lost effect. He was handcuffed, searched, and placed in the patrol vehicle per 2012 transport protocol, which included continuous video recording to prevent legal disputes. Elliot was transported to the Idaho State Police substation in McCall, rather than the local sheriff's office, to ensure the interview room had full audio-video recording capability meeting cold case standards. Upon entering the interview room, Elliot displayed clear tension but still attempted control, stating he wanted to cooperate fully. Carl understood this phase was not for direct confrontation, but to test consistency between his old statements and the 2012 reconstructed data. The sole objective of the first interview session, clarify the timeline of the night Eleanor disappeared. Carla began by reminding Elliot that he was not, at this point, being charged directly with the disappearance, but was being asked to explain contradictions in his statements. This technique reduces psychological defensiveness, making the suspect more prone to errors when attempting concealment. Carla requested Elliot repeat the entire schedule for that evening: time he picked Eleanor up at the diner, time he dropped her at home, travel route, and time he left her house. Elliot restated nearly verbatim his 1993 account. He picked Eleanor up around 8 p.m., dropped her home at 8:45, said goodbye, then drove straight home. No stops, no detours onto any trails, no encounters with others, and no incidents, preserving the exact structure he had provided to Valley County Sheriff's Office 19 years earlier. Carla asked for a more detailed route description, but Elliot gave only vague replies that he took the usual road as always, offering no specifics on speed, road conditions, or arrival time at his own home. When Carla presented the reconstructed timeline evidence based on travel speed and 2012 light data, Elliot mechanically repeated that I drove the route I stated from the beginning, acknowledging no discrepancies and making no comment on the simulation model's accuracy. When Carla referenced the witness who saw a vehicle matching his near the northern trail at 9:10 p.m. that night, Elliot immediately denied it outright, claiming the witness misidentified, misremembered, or that could not have been my vehicle. However, when Carla asked whether he had gone north even a few hundred meters that evening, Elliot replied only that no, I had no reason to go up there, and stopped without further explanation. When shifting to the micro-soil analysis from under his truck, proving the vehicle had entered the northern ravine area, Elliot continued to deny, stating dirt gets on vehicles in many ways, or I go many places in the woods, I don't remember them all, yet could name no location he had visited with soil matching red zone characteristics. Despite being asked 3 times in 3 different ways to test statement consistency, Elliot only circled back with it's just forest dirt, steadfastly avoiding any admission that his truck had entered the northern ravine cluster. When Carla showed images of the wool scarf found in the red zone and the matching DNA results with Eleanor, Elliot immediately asserted he had never seen that scarf, and that if it was there, she must have dropped it herself, despite no logical reason for Eleanor to have been alone in such rugged terrain far from her home, under 1993's light snowfall conditions. Carla continued presenting contradictions between his statements and the signature analysis, pointing out that post-disappearance check signatures lacked Eleanor's pen stroke characteristics. At this point, Elliot shifted tactics, claiming he only signed on her behalf when asked, but could describe no circumstance in which Eleanor requested this, nor explain why she would ask him to sign, at a time when, per his original statement, she had already disappeared. When Carla emphasized transactions occurring nearly 2 weeks after the disappearance, Elliot abruptly switched to complete denial, saying the bank must have recorded it wrong. The repeated shifts between absolute denial and vague explanations further eroded his statement consistency. Yet Elliot maintained the core position, denying presence in the red zone and insisting throughout that he had no involvement in Eleanor's disappearance. Notably, when Carla asked directly, "Did you ever set foot in the northern ravines during the week Eleanor disappeared?" Elliot answered immediately, "No," without hesitation, despite earlier repeatedly saying, "I don't remember exactly where I went in the woods." This was a highly illogical contradiction, yet Elliot did not adjust his response. By the end of the first interview session, Elliot still upheld his 1993 statement, denied all geoprofile conclusions, denied soil matches with the red zone, denied fibers in his truck, and offered no reasonable explanation for the clear contradictions in his statements, timing data, and physical evidence. Carla recorded in the memorandum that Elliot persistently denies, offers no alternative explanation, maintains 1993 statement despite conflicting evidence, a critical notation for assessing statement behavior and degree of intentional concealment. The first interview concluded with Elliot returned to holding, while Carla prepared the next phase of pressure strategy based on accumulated evidence and his evident inconsistencies. The second interview session took place the following morning, when Elliot Mercer was brought back to the interview room showing clear fatigue after a night in custody. Carla Norton had prepared all physical evidence, technical reports, and new witness statements in a strategic sequence designed to apply incremental pressure and force Elliot to confront contradictions he had evaded for nearly 2 decades. When Elliot sat down, Carla opened neutrally but firmly, stating that today's interview was not to rehear the 1993 statement, but for Elliot to explain new facts that could not be ignored. Elliot swallowed hard, looked down at the table, and said he had nothing to change, but Carla immediately noticed wavering in his eyes as she placed the first sealed evidence bag on the table, the wool scarf found in the red zone. She said nothing lengthy, merely flipped the evidence seal and emphasized, "This is Eleanor's scarf, DNA match. It was found in the northern ravines." Elliot blinked rapidly, then tried to maintain composure. "I don't know why it was there." Carla did not argue. She simply placed the fiber analysis report on the table, showing Elliot images of fibers recovered from his truck, and the conclusion, probable direct contact. Elliot turned his face away, hands clenched tightly. The first time he did not respond immediately. Carla noted the sign, then moved to the second piece of evidence, micro-soil samples. She laid out 3 enlarged photos, one of soil from Elliot's undercarriage, one from Eleanor's scarf, and one reference sample taken directly from the red zone. She stated, "These are 3 soil samples. Mineralogical analysis matches. This soil type does not exist in McCall, not on any route you claim to have driven. It exists only in the exact area where Eleanor's scarf was found." Elliot drew a deep breath, but did not reply, merely staring at the photos as if hoping they would disappear if he avoided direct eye contact. Carla continued, "You say you never went to that area, but the dirt under your truck says otherwise." Elliot responded slowly, voice strained, I don't remember driving there. I go into the woods a lot." Carl immediately pressed, "Where in the woods did you go during the week?" "Eleanor disappeared." Elliot fell silent, then muttered, "I don't remember." This was the contradiction Carla needed to highlight. She shifted to the third piece of evidence, this time one that visibly shook Elliot, the new witness statement. She placed the elderly man's recorded statement in front of him, the resident near the northern trail who saw headlight reflections at 9:10 p.m. on the night Eleanor disappeared. Carla stated clearly, "He identified the vehicle shape. It was your truck. No other vehicle entered the trail that night. This matches the reconstructed timeline perfectly." Elliot's hands clenched until the knuckles whitened, then he shook his head. He misidentified. It was dark. Snow was falling. Carla kept her tone even. He didn't just hear the vehicle. He saw headlight reflections, and the time he recorded matches the period you cannot account for. Elliot swallowed, glanced toward the corner of the room, avoiding Carla's gaze. This was the first time in both interview sessions he displayed such strong avoidance. Carla pressed further, "Elliot, in your 1993 statement, you said you left Eleanor's house at 8:45 p.m. and went straight home. But travel speed simulation proves you could not have reached home in the time you claimed. And in yesterday's interview, you said you left her house 10 minutes later. Why did you change that detail?" Elliot closed his eyes for a few seconds, then answered haltingly, I misremembered at first. I didn't want to say anything wrong." Carla did not let him retreat behind that answer. "It wasn't a misremembering. You were adjusting the time to fit new data. But even with the adjustment, you still cannot explain your vehicle's appearance on the northern trail." Elliot suddenly looked up. "So suppose I did drive up there. It still doesn't prove anything. I go into the woods. I like driving around. Carla countered immediately. But you never mentioned that in 19 years. Why didn't you say so from the beginning? Elliot fell silent. His defensiveness was shifting to confusion. Carla slowly placed her hand on the final piece of evidence, the red zone map with 3 GPR-detected anomalies. She turned the map toward Elliot. Elliot, you are facing scientific evidence. Soil in your truck, fibers in your truck, Eleanor's scarf, forged signatures, bank transactions, trail witness, contradictory timeline, and now disturbed soil structure, right in the zone you deny ever visiting. Elliot's right hand trembled slightly. He licked his lips, then said in a low voice, I don't remember exactly that night. Maybe I did drive up north a bit, but I didn't go deep. I had no reason to go in there. Carla immediately recorded. This was the first time Elliot admitted the possibility of being near the red zone area, even indirectly and evasively. She pressed, You don't need a reason to drive to the Northern Trail, but you do need a reason to conceal that fact for 19 years. Elliot looked up, face paling. I'm not concealing. I just forgot. Carla tilted her head, looking directly at him. Elliot, every piece of evidence shows that night you did not follow the route you claimed. You went north, you approached the ravines, and you know it. Elliot looked down at the table, shoulders hunching. When Carla asked once more, Are you prepared to adjust your timeline to match reality? Elliot whispered, Maybe I don't remember correctly, maybe I did turn up there, but I didn't do anything wrong. This was a clear sign of breakdown in the original statement. He was no longer denying outright but beginning to adjust the story, opening the path to partial admission. The second interview session ended with Elliot visibly shaken and his initial timeline starting to fracture, a significant advance in the strategy to shift the suspect from denial to explanation and from explanation to admission. The afternoon interview session that same day began in a quieter than usual room, with Elliot Mercer entering in a state of obvious exhaustion, red eyes, slumped shoulders, and heavy breathing, as though the entire defense he had maintained for 19 years was finally cracking. Carla Norton observed his body language very carefully, noting every sign that his defensiveness had significantly decreased compared to the morning session. After restating his legal rights and confirming Elliot still agreed to continue the interview, Carla opened the conversation in a low, non-confrontational voice, asking only, What happened between you and Eleanor that night? Elliot remained silent for a very long time, his hands clasped tightly together until his knuckles turned white. Finally he sighed, leaned forward, and spoke in a hoarse voice. We had an argument. This was the first time Elliot admitted any conflict, completely breaking the everything was normal description he had maintained since 1993. Carla did not interrupt, letting the silence force Elliot to continue. He closed his eyes, then slowly recounted, When I brought her home, she blamed me. She said I didn't take care of her enough, said I didn't see her as important. And I got angry. I said too much. She stood up, then slipped and fell. Elliot described Eleanor, losing balance, as she rose from the chair near the kitchen door, falling backward hard and striking her head on the edge of the wooden cabinet. He said she fell very quickly, as if sliding on the floor, and lay motionless immediately. Carla asked, Did you check for a pulse? Elliot nodded but did not look directly at her. I think she wasn't breathing. I panicked. I had never seen someone die in front of me. The halting words, yet clearly a complete departure from his earlier rigid denials. However, Elliot still insisted he had not intentionally caused injury. I didn't push her. I didn't want her to fall. It just happened. He repeated this twice as though trying to convince himself. Carla noted it but did not interject. When asked why he did not call emergency services, Elliot bowed his head deeply, voice trembling. I was scared. I thought everyone would blame me. She was elderly. I was the last one there. No one would believe me. This was the psychological shift Carla had been waiting for, from denial to explanation to self-justification, and now to accepting responsibility for the consequences. Carla continued gently but sharply. What happened after that? Elliot swallowed hard, then answered, I left her lying there for a long time. I walked around the house. I didn't know what to do. Then I thought, if they found her in my house, I would be charged. This fear was a recurring motif in criminal files involving body disposal. Carla recognized the familiar pattern. Elliot continued. I wrapped her in a blanket from the bedroom. I dragged her to the truck. It was dark. I didn't think anyone saw, Carla asked. Why did you take her to the northern ravine area? Elliot raised a hand to rub his face, voice nearly breaking. I don't know. I just drove. I couldn't think. I turned onto the trail. I had been there a few times. I knew the area was empty. I wanted to hide her so no one would find her. When Carla asked him to describe the disposal, Elliot answered that he drove about half a mile in before having to drag Eleanor farther on foot. I dug a shallow hole. The ground was very hard. I put her down. I covered her with dirt. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. The apology came out very softly, trembling, not directed at Carla, but as though spoken to Eleanor in memory. Elliot continued to deny any intentional killing. I didn't kill her, I swear. I didn't mean to push or hit her. I was scared. I lost control. Carla asked again, did you push her during the argument? Elliot reacted immediately. No. We were just raising our voices. She stood up too fast. I didn't touch her. This was the pivotal point. Elliot accepted the disposal, but still denied causing death. This fit a common psychological pattern. The suspect admits what can be proven physically, but holds back the most serious criminal element. Carla did not argue the cause of death at this stage. Because the critical goal had been achieved, Elliot confirmed the argument. Confirmed Eleanor died while he was present, and most importantly, he confirmed transporting the body to the exact red zone to conceal it. This admission aligned perfectly with the GPR results, the scarf evidence, the microsoil traces, the reconstructed timeline, and the trail witness statement. At the end of the second interview session, Elliot was left whispering, if I had called 911, things might have been different, but I was afraid everyone would think I was a killer. Carla closed the session to memorandum with a brief but legally weighty note. Suspect admits presence at time of victim's death, admits body disposal at red zone, admits intentional concealment of the incident, continues to deny intentional causation of death. The truth the investigation had sought for 19 years, unable to establish, had now been spoken by Elliot Mercer in his own voice. The next morning, immediately after the interview in which Elliot Mercer admitted the argument, admitted the death occurred in his presence, and admitted the body disposal, Carla Norton, together with representatives from the Valley County Prosecutor's Office, promptly requested that he point out the exact burial location of Eleanor Hayes in the red zone. Elliot initially hesitated, hands clasped tightly, eyes darting toward the door as though seeking escape. But when informed that the investigation would proceed with excavation regardless of his cooperation, based on GPR results and the Geoprofile map, he remained silent for a very long time before nodding and saying, in a nearly extinguished voice, I'll take you there. I don't want to hide anymore. In the recorded memorandum, Carla added an important note. Suspect agrees to point out location without requesting counsel to terminate interview. Voluntary. The forensic team, special search unit, and 4 Idaho State police officers immediately prepared for the trip, bringing manual excavation tools, specialized bone recovery bags, evidence sealing trays, scene cameras, GPS coordinate equipment, and printed topographic maps based on GPR data. Because the red zone was rugged terrain, the entire team was assigned off-road vehicles. Elliot, handcuffed in front, was transported in a separate vehicle, seated in the back with 2 escorting officers. Although not charged with violent offenses at this point, he was classified as medium security risk due to potential flight hazard in a field setting. Upon reaching the edge of the northern trail, Elliot appeared restless, eyes repeatedly scanning the tall pines as though trying to retrace memories he had tried to bury for nearly 2 decades. Carla requested his handcuffs be removed, but kept a control tether on his wrists and 2 officers close for safety. Elliot slowly stepped out of the vehicle, looked around for a long moment, then said, "We go this way." The direction he indicated matched the map the team had prepared, the very trail leading deep into the red zone, where GPR had previously detected disturbed soil. Elliot's correct identification of the route further reinforced the credibility of his statements. Elliot led the team approximately half a mile in, occasionally pausing due to slippery slopes from melting snow, sometimes steadying himself against tree trunks. Despite 19 years having passed, he still remembered every segment, every small bend, proof he had indeed been the one to bring the body here on the night. Eleanor disappeared. At a location about 30 meters northeast of the Scarf Discovery Point, Elliot stopped, pointed to a flat patch of ground between two large pine trees, and said in a trembling voice, "Right here, I remember. I dug right between these two trees." Carla ordered the forensic team to mark GPS coordinates, cross-reference with GPR data, and confirm the location Elliot indicated matched 100% with the previously recorded disturbed soil zone. There was no longer any doubt this was the burial site. Excavation began immediately after securing the area and erecting a protective tent to avoid scene contamination. The forensic team used hand shovels, small trowels, and soft brushes to prevent damage to bones or other evidence. The upper soil had hardened over time, but the lower layer still showed distinct signs of having been dug and refilled in 1993, matching Elliot's description of a shallow hole that was very hard to dig. Within less than an hour, the forensic team uncovered the first bone fragment, a section of humerus, located about 25–30 centimeters below the surface, consistent with the average depth of amateur disposal pits. Elliot turned his face away, shoulders shaking. Carla ordered officers to move him back, outside direct observation range. As the team continued, more bones were recovered: pelvis, ribs, scattered vertebrae, and a partial skull with separation at the occipital region, matching Elliot's description that Eleanor had fallen backward and struck her head hard. Beside the skeletal remains, the forensic team found another key piece of evidence: a small metal clothing clip engraved with EH, which Eleanor's family had previously provided comparison images for, but which was never located in the home in 1993. There were also remnants of synthetic blanket fabric, degraded over time but still retaining characteristic fiber structure. Once the skeletal remains were fully collected, the forensic team packaged them in specialized containers and transported them to the lab for DNA identification from bone. It took nearly 5 days of analysis, comparing mitochondrial DNA from pelvis and skull samples against Eleanor's preserved DNA profile from her 1993 hairbrush. The final results returned: match at near absolute probability level, identity, Eleanor Hayes. Carla received the report, paused for a few seconds before that line. The truth the McCall community had awaited for 19 years was now confirmed by direct forensic evidence. The discovery of the skeletal remains not only corroborated Elliot's admissions, but also eliminated any possibility that Eleanor left town voluntarily, a hypothesis raised in the early days of the 1993 investigation. When this information was entered into the case file, the missing persons case officially became a confirmed victim homicide, and all of Elliot's prior statements were placed in a new legal context, now that the body had been recovered exactly where he described. With complete alignment between the pointing out, GPR evidence, on-site physical evidence, and DNA results, Carla had sufficient grounds to conclude that Elliot was not only involved in disposal, but directly linked to Eleanor Hayes's death, though he continued to insist it was unintentional. The raising of Eleanor Hayes's skeletal remains from the northern ravine soil marked the single most important turning point in the investigation. The truth hidden for nearly 2 decades had finally surfaced, right where Elliot once believed no one would ever find it. Eleanor Hayes's skeletal remains were immediately transferred to the Boise Forensic Pathology Lab, where a team of forensic anthropologists specializing in human bone, trauma analysts, and DNA technicians began a multi-day examination process to determine degree of decomposition, assess perimortem and post-mortem injuries, and identify factors that could support prosecution of Elliot Mercer. When the skeleton was laid out on the examination table in correct anatomical position, experts noted decomposition levels consistent with burial in dry, cold soil for nearly 19 years. Bones yellowish-brown, surfaces lightly eroded by soil microorganisms, but overall structure sufficiently intact for clear trauma evaluation. First, the forensic team analyzed decomposition signs. No soft tissue remained, no cartilage, but long bones and pelvis remained stable, allowing determination of body build and age consistent with Eleanor. They also noted pressure cracks from long-term soil weight, but these had different morphology from antemortem impact injuries, helping distinguish event-related trauma. The first notable finding appeared on the skull, where experts identified a large fracture in the occipito-parietal region, extending about 4 cm, with sharp fracture edges and no signs of erosion. Micromorphological analysis showed the fracture occurred while bone was still elastic, that is, peri-mortem or immediately at death, rather than post-mortem. This was strong evidence that Eleanor sustained significant head trauma, a conclusion fully consistent with Elliot's admission that she fell backward and struck her head on the kitchen cabinet. However, the forensic team also determined that the force required to cause such a skull fracture was unlikely from a simple light fall. This raised questions about the actual impact force Elliot described. The forensic pathologist noted that the fracture pattern indicated a hard, relatively narrow surface, such as a cabinet edge or furniture corner, but the impact force had to exceed that typically seen in an uncomplicated slip. This was an important technical point. It did not directly contradict Elliot's account, but indicated greater force than described. Moving to the ribs, the forensic team found 2 right-side ribs with small incomplete fractures, fracture surfaces showing injury near time of death. Still unhealed, no new calcium deposition. This injury could result from a hard fall or from handling during body transport, but forensic experts assessed the former as more likely because the impact zone aligned opposite the skull fracture site. Although not direct evidence of violence, this trauma reinforced the hypothesis that the fall was forceful enough to cause multi-point injury, not limited to the skull. Continuing with arm and leg bones, the forensic team found no defensive wounds or injuries to wrists or hands, typically present if the victim attempted to brace during a fall. This indicated Eleanor may have lost balance suddenly without time to protect herself, or was struck from behind. This was a crucial technical detail. If the death truly was accidental, the victim's fall posture might fit, but the complete absence of defensive reflexes made Elliot's scenario more questionable, especially if a heated argument preceded it. The forensic pathologist recorded in the report, no defensive injuries, peri-mortem skull trauma, significant impact force. Another noted factor was the body position in the grave. Long bones were nearly aligned, but upper limbs slightly offset to one side, suggesting the body may have been placed in an unnatural posture, consistent with being dragged or carried into the pit. Soil samples trapped in bone grooves also indicated rapid burial, with no signs of ritual preparation or careful handling. The cause of death assessment was issued by the forensic team after 3 days of discussion. Skull trauma is the highly probable cause of death. No evidence supports natural cause death hypothesis. The report also affirmed that the extent of occipital parietal injury was consistent with strong impact against a hard surface, with force sufficient to cause immediate or very rapid death. Regarding post-mortem trauma, the forensic team noted that secondary small fractures in ribs and lower limbs could have occurred during Elliot's body transport, but did not affect cause of death. The most legally significant element in the report was the timing of injuries. All indicators showed skull trauma occurred while Eleanor was alive or immediately at death, not post-mortem. This carried very high evidentiary value because it directly implicated Elliot's criminal responsibility. Finally, the report concluded, skeletal data and decomposition level consistent with admitted disposal. However, severity of head trauma and absence of defensive reflexes make mechanism of death not fully consistent with description of light fall. Forensic findings support prosecution for offenses related to causing death, whether intentional or unintentional. With this conclusion, Carla possessed a stronger legal foundation than any prior evidence. Eleanor's skeleton not only confirmed the burial location, but provided a clear picture of injury nature, reinforcing suspicion that her death was not merely accidental as Elliot described. The investigation moved into a new phase, the phase in which full forensic truth began confronting the final statements of the man who had concealed the secret for 19 years. The Valley County Prosecutor's Office immediately began compiling all documents upon receiving the final forensic pathology report, viewing it as the foundation for drafting formal charges against Elliot Mercer on 4 key offense groups: manslaughter related to Eleanor Hayes's death, concealment and disposal of a corpse, financial fraud exploiting the victim's identity after disappearance, and obstruction of justice through repeated false statements over nearly 2 decades. The prosecution file was constructed from a tightly linked evidence chain: physical evidence recovered at Red Zone, Elliot's partial admissions during the second and third interviews, financial data proving misappropriation, and forensic conclusions determining cause of death inconsistent with the defendant's light fall description. Lead prosecutor Samuel Arnett opened the charging preparation process by organizing all evidence chronologically, from Eleanor's last sighting through Elliot's 1993 statement, contradictions, the 2012 discoveries, and finally, the skeletal exhumation. Arnett placed special emphasis on highlighting 3 pillars of culpability: 1 fatal injury, evidenced by strong trauma per forensic conclusion; 2 intentional disposal, demonstrated by transporting the body to a remote ravine area; 3 the chain of financial transactions after Eleanor's disappearance, carried out by Elliot using forged signatures. This material was compiled into a legal summary exceeding 80 pages, with 142 appendices of physical and witness evidence. Arnett requested Carla Norton's investigative team provide detailed descriptions of the scarf identification method, including degraded DNA comparison, test reliability, and evidence distribution diagram within Red Zone. Similarly, he requested full reports on soil and microtraces in Elliot's truck, with specific explanations of 2012 standard analysis methods to ensure court admissibility. In parallel, the Financial Crimes Unit completed a comprehensive table of transactions Elliot conducted under Eleanor's name, including multiple unexplained large cash withdrawals and a series of forged signature checks. The chain of transactions extending months after the presumed date of Eleanor's death became one of the strongest bases for fraud and misappropriation charges. Prosecutor Arnett also requested comparison of Eleanor's pre-1993 legal document signatures against question checks, with independent handwriting experts concluding that the forgery level was consistent with someone attempting imitation but failing to replicate the true subject's pen movement habits. The handwriting report was attached as independent expert evidence, further strengthening the argument that Elliot maintained financial motive by prolonging concealment of Eleanor's death. On the procedural side, the manslaughter charge was built on the model of death resulting from gross negligence because although Elliot did not admit intentional killing, the trauma evidence showed the victim sustained force exceeding a simple fall. Prosecution did not need to prove intent to kill, only that Elliot's conduct caused death and he intentionally failed to summon aid and intentionally disposed of the body. The corpse concealment charge was formed from Elliot leading police to the burial site while admitting he personally dug the pit and placed the body without reporting. The financial fraud charge was constructed from original bank documents and records seized in the 1993 file, cross-referenced with 2012 bank data. Meanwhile, the obstruction of justice charge was reinforced by Elliot's multiple false statements in 1993 and continued false declarations during re-interviews before evidence presentation. All 4 offense groups were combined into a unified charging document reflecting comprehensive evaluation based on the full new and old evidence set. After completing evidence compilation, Arnett submitted the entire file to the district court judge for charging review. In the internal review hearing, the judge evaluated each document section per Idaho legal standards, assessing forensic evidence reliability, statement validity, and evidence collection procedures at the scene. After 2 days of review, the court accepted all prosecution counts and issued formal notice. Elliot Mercer was charged with 4 offenses under Idaho statutes, including second-degree manslaughter, corpse concealment, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice. That same afternoon, the district court scheduled the first pretrial hearing, set 6 weeks later, to allow both sides sufficient preparation time. Elliot was transferred from Valley County holding to Ada County Detention Facility per protocol for felony defendants. A witness contact restriction order was issued, and the court required prosecution to disclose the anticipated evidence list to defense counsel within 10 days. With the trial schedule set, the Eleanor Hayes case officially entered the public legal phase, marking the end of a nearly two-decade investigation and opening a new stage, the stage in which all evidence would be presented before a jury to determine Elliot Mercer's responsibility. The trial of Elliot Mercer took place in Valley County District Court under the oversight of Judge Harold Stenson, with full participation from prosecutor Samuel Arnett, the defense team led by Martin Kelleher, and a jury of 12 members selected through 3 rounds of voir dire. On the very first day, the prosecution opened by reconstructing the entire 19-year journey of the case, emphasizing the irrefutable chain of physical evidence, the wool scarf bearing Eleanor's DNA, found deep in the red zone, soil adhering to the undercarriage of Elliot's truck, perfectly matching the soil composition of the northern ravine area. Financial records showing multiple transactions after Eleanor's disappearance, carried out by Elliot using forged signatures, and the forensic pathology report, determining that the bone injuries were inconsistent with the claim of a light accidental fall. Each piece of evidence was presented through maps, scene photographs, analysis charts, laboratory reports, accompanied by direct explanations from investigator Carla Norton and forensic experts. The prosecution placed particular emphasis on the body disposal conduct. Elliot had led police to the precise location where he buried Eleanor, consistent with the GPR map and the anomalous soil structure. Arnett described this behavior as a deliberate sequence of actions intended to conceal the cause of death while enabling continued use of the victim's assets. When shifting to the financial aspect, the prosecution presented side-by-side comparisons of Eleanor's pre-1993 signature samples against the post-disappearance checks with independent handwriting experts, concluding they were forgeries. Bank ledgers recorded more than 10 unauthorized transactions, with a total amount exceeding any plausible level that could be justified as signing on Eleanor's behalf with prior permission. The prosecution also called the new witness, the individual who saw Elliot's vehicle on the Northern Trail the night Eleanor disappeared, and had the witness describe in detail the context, direction of travel, and vehicle characteristics. The testimony aligned with the geoprofile data and the soil samples recovered from the truck. When the evidence presentation concluded, the prosecution argued that Elliot's conduct could not be viewed merely as an accident, but as a calculated chain of decisions to conceal the truth, delay investigation, and personally profit from Eleanor's disappearance. In the defense opening, attorney Martin Keller conceded the wrongful financial conduct and the act of body disposal, but vehemently denied any intentional causation of death. The defense focused on the psychological dimension of panic. Elliot was portrayed as a sensitive individual prone to losing control in stressful situations, and when Eleanor fell, resulting in severe injury, he entered a state of extreme fear. They asserted that Elliot believed she had died on the spot and lacked the rational capacity to call emergency services. The defense team also attempted to diminish the weight of the forensic evidence by arguing that the degree of decomposition after 19 years could lead to misinterpretation of trauma signs. However, forensic experts immediately rebutted, clearly explaining the stability of skeletal injuries and why they could not result from a low-impact fall. When the prosecution presented evidence of financial transactions after Eleanor's death, the defense shifted to arguing that Elliot was merely following a pre-existing habit of assistance and had no intent to profit, an argument the prosecution refuted with financial analysis charts demonstrating an abnormal spike in Elliot's personal spending immediately following Eleanor's disappearance. During Elliot's own testimony, he continued to maintain the accident and panic disposal narrative, but when cross-examined by the prosecution, he could not explain why someone merely panicked would combine multiple systematic concealment actions spanning many months. After hearing all evidence, testimony, cross-examination, and expert analysis, the jury was sent to deliberate on the 12th day of trial. Deliberations lasted over 4 hours. At 4:17 p.m., they returned to the courtroom. The jury foreperson announced the verdict. Elliot Mercer was found guilty of second-degree manslaughter, corpse concealment, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice. The recommended sentence, 25 years imprisonment, without early parole. Judge Stenson accepted the recommendation and imposed sentence immediately in court, stating that the prolonged concealment and interference with the administration of justice are significant aggravating factors. Elliot was escorted from the courtroom in silence, marking the conclusion of a trial that closed nearly 2 decades of mystery surrounding Eleanor Hayes's disappearance. The Eleanor Hayes case was quickly recognized as one of the most significant cold case resolutions in Idaho history, not only because of the nearly 2-decade span before it was solved, but also because it marked the transition from traditional investigative models to a modern forensic foundation relying on microtrace analysis, geographic modeling, and degraded DNA processing. When the sentence against Elliot Mercer was pronounced and the file officially closed, state investigative agencies assessed that this case had become a textbook example demonstrating that initial investigative shortcomings, lack of technology, lack of evidence collection standards, lack of analytical capability, did not equate to permanent impasse, provided original data was properly preserved and could be re-exploited with new techniques. The Idaho Cold Case Team, established in 2012, viewed the Eleanor case as the first test case for the state's new standards on reopening long-term missing persons files, and from it the investigative process model was more widely adopted across rural, mountainous counties with sparse populations. Experts highlighted the pivotal role of microtrace analysis, a technique non-existent in 1993, in examining soil from Elliot's undercarriage, clearly establishing his trajectory into the red zone and thereby dismantling his years-long denials. In parallel, degraded DNA analysis technology played a foundational role when fibers from the scarf were matched against Eleanor's family-preserved profile, producing the first piece of evidence directly linking the victim to the suspect area after nearly 2 decades without any field evidence. The application of geographic data in the 2012 Geoprofiling model was also rated a turning point, as this technology allowed full reconstruction of travel routes based on accessibility, driver habits, terrain structure, and universal disposal behaviors in forested mountain regions. It was this model that pinpointed the red zone as the high-probability area, an area never searched in the 1990s due to terrain limitations, manpower constraints, and technical shortcomings. The case also underscored the importance of proper records preservation. The 1993 financial documents, initially filed merely as background, became by 2012 the cornerstone for establishing Elliot's prolonged fraudulent conduct when cross-referenced with original signatures and analyzed by independent experts, while simultaneously exposing the economic motive tied to concealing Eleanor's death. Another major impact noted in the Valley County Summary Report was the shift in law enforcement perception of missing elderly cases. In 1993, Eleanor's case was classified as low risk simply because no signs of violence were present, leading to no expanded search within the initial 72 hours. Following this case, Idaho implemented new guidelines encouraging risk assessment based on the victim's living habits and social circumstances rather than solely on signs of forced entry or in-home violence evidence. For the McCall community, the case's closure brought both relief and lingering shock. For many years, the name Eleanor Hayes had become a haunting presence in local memory, a kind elderly woman who vanished without trace in a small, peaceful town. When the truth emerged, many residents were stunned that Elliot Mercer, once regarded as close to Eleanor, had been the central figure in the crime. Some described the feeling as like 2 worlds overlapping, the polite, gentle Elliot in community memory versus the Elliot who concealed a body deep in the forest, forged signatures, and lied to police for nearly 2 decades. Community organizations in McCall subsequently launched multiple awareness programs to heighten vigilance while promoting psychological support for families of missing persons. On the investigative side, the case was rated a model of interagency collaboration as the cold case team worked closely with geologists, DNA analysts, handwriting experts, mountain search teams, and Idaho banking authorities. The case's success helped drive increased investment in forensic training programs at Idaho State University, particularly in microtrace and degraded DNA analysis under prolonged cold, humid terrain conditions. When the file was officially closed, the summary report from the prosecutor's office concluded that the Eleanor Hayes case demonstrated a fundamental principle of modern investigation. No missing persons case should ever be deemed permanently unsolvable, because each new generation of technology has the capacity to make old layers of data speak in ways that people at the time could not hear. After 19 years, the case's resolution was not merely the end of a prolonged search, but became the foundation for comprehensive change in how Idaho approaches, processes, and recovers truth in complex missing persons investigations. Looking back at the entire Eleanor Hayes case in the context of contemporary American life, we see a vital lesson: community safety depends not only on technology or law enforcement, but also on individual vigilance, honesty, and responsibility. The story shows that even in a peaceful town like McCall, Idaho, where people believe they truly know their neighbors, a tragedy lasting nearly 2 decades can still occur simply because initial anomalies are downplayed. The fact that Eleanor went missing without anyone noticing for 2 consecutive days reminds us that in modern life, especially in the United States, where many elderly live independently, maintaining mutual check-ins, even if only a phone call or quick visit, can be the decisive factor between safety and danger. In addition, Elliot Mercer's conduct reflects a sobering reality in American society. Personal finance and the exploitation of elderly trust remain a painful issue. Elliot forged Eleanor's signature, conducted transactions on her behalf, and concealed her body to continue controlling her assets, a pattern that remains all too real in many current cases. This reminds us to protect the financial interests of aging loved ones, ensure they do not become overly dependent on a single individual, and implement legal safeguards such as transparent financial oversight or bank monitoring. Finally, the story demonstrates the power of modern forensic technology in delivering justice, even after decades have passed. The analysis of soil microtraces, degraded DNA, and geographic modeling, once applied to solve the Eleanor case, is now widely used across the United States to resolve thousands of cold cases. The lesson here is no matter how deeply the past is buried, truth still finds a path to emerge. What each person can do is cooperate with authorities, preserve truthful information, and trust that justice, though delayed, can still arrive. Thank you for following this nearly 2-decade-long case resolution to the end. If you want to continue joining us on stories of justice reclaimed like the Eleanor Hayes case, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring mysteries that once seemed lost to time, but ultimately were called back by truth.